To an Old Mate by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Larry Wilson. Old Mate. In the gusty old weather, when our hopes and our troubles were new, in the years spent in wearing out leather, I found you unselfish and true. I have gathered these verses together for the sake of our friendship and you. You may think for a while, and with reason, though still with a kindly regret, that I've left it full late in the season to prove I remember you yet. But you'll never judge me by their treason, who profit by friends and forget. I remember, old man, I remember. The tracks that we followed are clear. The jovial last nights of December, the solemn first days of the year, long tramps through the clearings and timber, short partings on platform and pier. I can still feel the spirit that bore us, and often the old stars will shine. I remember the last spree and chorus, for the sake of that other lang syne, when the tracks lay divided before us, your path through the future and mine, through the frost wind that cut like whiplashes, through the ever blind haze of the drought, and in fancy at times by the flashes of light in the darkness of doubt. I have followed the tent poles and ashes of camps that we moved further out. You will find in these pages a trace of that side of our past which was bright, and recognize sometimes the face of a friend who has dropped out of sight. I send them along in the place of the letters I promised to write. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. In the Days When the World Was Wide by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Larry Wilson. The world is narrow and ways are short, and our lives are dull and slow, for little is new where the crowds resort, and less where the wanderers go. Greater or smaller, the same old things we see by the dull roadside, and tired of all is the spirit that sings of the days when the world was wide. When the North was hale in the march of time, and the South and the West were new, and the gorgeous East was a pantomime, as it seemed in our boyhood's view. When Spain was first on the waves of change, and proud in the ranks of pride, and all was wonderful, new and strange, in the days when the world was wide. Then a man could fight if his heart were bold, and win if his faith were true. Were it love, or honor, or power, or gold, or all that our hearts pursue, could live to the world for the family name, or die for the family pride, could fly from sorrow and wrong and shame, in the days when the world was wide. They sailed away in the ships, and sailed ere science controlled the main, when the strong, brave heart of a man prevailed as 'twill never prevail again. They knew not whither, nor much they cared. Let fate or the winds decide. The worst of the great unknown they dared in the days when the world was wide. They raised new stars on the silent sea that filled their hearts with awe. They came to many a strange country, and marvelous sights they saw. The villagers gaped at the tales they told, and old eyes glistened with pride, when barbarous cities were paved with gold, in the days when the world was wide. 'Twas honest metal and honest wood, in the days of the outward bound, when men were gallant and ships were good, roaming the wide world round. The gods could envy a leader then when, "Follow me, lads," he cried. They faced each other and fought like men, in the days when the world was wide. They tried to live as free men should. They were happier men than we, in the glorious days of wine and blood, when liberty crossed the sea. 'Twas a comrade true or a foeman then, and a trusty sword well tried. They faced each other and fought like men, in the days when the world was wide. The good ship bound for the southern seas, when the beacon was Ballarat, with a "Ship ahoy!" on the freshening breeze. Where bound? And what ship's that? The emigrant train to New Mexico, the rush to the Lachlan side. Ah, faint is the echo of Westward Ho! From the days when the world was wide. South, east, and west in advance of time, and aye in advance of thought, those brave men rose to a height sublime. And is it for this they fought? And is it for this damned life we praise the godlike spirit that died at Eureka Stockade in the roaring days, with the days when the world was wide? We fight like women, and feel as much. The thoughts of our hearts we guard, where scarcely the scorn of a god could touch. The sneer of a sneak hits hard. The treacherous tongue and cowardly pen, the weapons of curs decide. They faced each other and fought like men in the days when the world was wide. Think of it all, of the life that is. Study your friends and foes, study the past, and answer this: are these times better than those? The lifelong quarrel, the paltry spite, the sting of your poisoned pride, no matter who fell, it were better to fight as they did when the world was wide. Boast as you will of your mateship now, crippled and mean and sly, the lines of suspicion on friendship's brow were traced since the days gone by. There was room in the long, free lines of the van to fight for it side by side. There was beating room for the heart of a man in the days when the world was wide. With its dull, brown days of a shilling an hour, the dreary years drag round. Is this the result of old England's power, the born of the outward bound? Is this the sequel of Westward Ho, of the days of whate'er betide? The heart of the rebel makes answer, No, we'll fight till the world grows wide. The world shall yet be a wider world, for the tokens are manifest. East and north shall the wrongs be hurled that followed us south and west. The march of freedom is north by the dawn. Follow whate'er betide, sons of the exiles, march! March on, march till the world grows wide. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Faces in the Street by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Kathleen Flanary. Faces in the Street. They lie, the men who tell us in a loud, decisive tone that want is here a stranger and that misery's unknown. For where the nearest suburb and the city proper meet, my windowsill is level with the faces in the street, drifting past to the beat of weary feet, while I sorrow for the owners of those faces in the street. And cause I have to sorrow in a land so young and fair, to see upon those faces stamped the marks of want and care. I look in vain for traces of the fresh and fair and sweet, in sallow, sunken faces that are drifting through the street, drifting on, to the scrape of restless feet. I can sorrow for the owners of the faces in the street. In hours before the dawning dims the starlight in the sky, the wan and weary faces first begin to trickle by, increasing as the moments hurry on with morning feet, till like a pallid river flow the faces in the street, flowing in, to the beat of hurried feet. Ah, I sorrow for the owners of those faces in the street. The human river dwindles when 'tis past the hour of 8. Its waves go flowing faster in the fear of being late, but slowly drag the moments, whilst beneath the dust and heat, the city grinds the owners of the faces in the street. Grinding body, grinding soul, yielding scarce enough to eat. Oh, I sorrow for the owners of the faces in the street. And then the only faces till the sun is sinking down are those of outside toilers and the idlers of the town. Save here and there a face that seems a stranger in the street, tells of the city's unemployed upon his weary beat. Drifting round to the tread of listless feet. Ah, my heart aches for the owner of that sad face in the street. And when the hours on lagging feet have slowly dragged away, and sickly yellow gaslights rise to mock the going day, then flowing past my window like a tide in its retreat, again I see the pallid stream of faces in the street, ebbing out to the drag of tired feet, while my heart is aching dumbly for the faces in the street. And now all blurred and smirched with vice the day's sad pages end, for while the short, large hours toward the longer, small hours trend, with smiles that mock the wearer and with words that half entreat, Delilah pleads for custom at the corner of the street. Sinking down, battered wreck by tempest's beat, a dreadful, thankless trade is hers, that woman of the street. But ah, to dreader things than these our fair young city comes, for in its heart are growing thick the filthy dens and slums, where human forms shall rot away in sights for swine unmeet, and ghostly faces shall be seen unfit for any street, rotting out for the lack of air and meat, in dens of vice and horror that are hidden from the street. I wonder would the apathy of wealthy men endure, were all their windows level with the faces of the poor? Ah, Mammon's slaves, your knees shall knock, your hearts in terror beat, when God demands a reason for the sorrows of the street. The wrong things and the bad things and the sad things that we meet in the filthy lane and alley and the cruel, heartless street. I left the dreadful corner where the steps are never still, and sought another window overlooking gorge and hill. But when the night came dreary with their driving rain and sleet, they haunted me, the shadows of those faces in the street, flitting by with noiseless feet, and with cheeks but little paler than the real ones in the street. Once I cried, O God Almighty, if thy might doth still endure, now show me in a vision for the wrongs of earth a cure. And lo, with shops all shuttered, I beheld a city's street, and in the warning distance heard the tramp of many feet, coming near, to a drum's dull distant beat. And soon I saw the army that was marching down the street. Then, like a swollen river that has broken bank and wall, the human flood came pouring with the red flags over all, and kindled eyes all blazing bright with revolution's heat, and flashing swords reflecting rigid faces in the street, pouring on, to a drum's loud threatening beat, and the war hymns and the cheering of the people in the street. And so it must be while the world goes rolling round its course, the warning pen shall write in vain, the warning voice grow hoarse. But not until a city feels red revolution's feet shall its sad people miss awhile the terrors of the street, the dreadful everlasting strife for scarcely clothes and meat, in that pent track of living death, the city's cruel street. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. The Roaring Days by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Kathleen Flanary. The Roaring Days. The night too quickly passes and we are growing old. So let us fill our glasses and toast the days of gold, when finds of wondrous treasure set all the South ablaze, and you and I were faithful mates all through the roaring days. Then stately ships came sailing from every harbor's mouth, and sought the land of promise that beaconed in the south. Then southward streamed their streamers and swelled their canvas full, to speed the wildest dreamers, airborne in vessels' hull. Their shining El Dorado beneath the southern skies was day and night forever before their eager eyes. The brooding bush, awakened, was stirred in wild unrest, and all the year a human stream went pouring to the west. The rough bush roads re-echoed the bar-room's noisy din, when troops of stalwart horsemen dismounted at the inn. And oft the hearty greetings and hearty clasp of hands would tell of sudden meetings of friends from other lands. When, puzzled long, the new chum would recognize at last, behind a bronzed and bearded skin, a comrade of the past. And when the cheery campfire explored the bush with gleams, the camping grounds were crowded with caravans of teams. Then home the jests were driven, and good old songs were sung, and choruses were given the strength of heart and lung. Oh, they were lion-hearted who gave our country birth. Oh, they were of the stoutest sons from all the lands on earth. Oft when the camps were dreaming and fires began to pale, through rugged ranges gleaming would come the royal mail. Behind 6 foaming horses, and lit by flashing lamps, old Cobb and Coes in royal state went dashing past the camps. Oh, who would paint a gold field and limn the picture right, as we have often seen it in early morning's light? The yellow mounds of mullock with spots of red and white, the scattered quartz that glistened like diamonds in light, the azure line of ridges, the bush of darkest green, the little homes of calico that dotted all the scene. I hear the fall of timber from distant flats and fells, the pealing of the anvils as clear as little bells, the rattle of the cradle, the clack of windlass bowls, the flutter of the crimson flags above the golden holes. Ah, then our hearts were bolder, and if Dame Fortune frowned, our swags we'd lightly shoulder and tramp to other ground. But golden days are vanished, and altered is the scene. The diggings are deserted, the camping grounds are green. The flaunting flag of progress is in the west unfurled. The mighty bush with iron rails is tethered to the world. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Forward by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway. 21st of November 2016, Kent. It is stuffy in the steerage where the second classers sleep, for there's near 100 forward and they're stowed away like sheep. They are travellers for the most part in a straight and honest path, but their linen's rather scanty and there isn't any bath. Stowed away like ewes and wethers, that is sure and marked and draft. But the shearers of the shearers always seem to travel aft. In the cushioned cabins aft, with saloons and smoke rooms aft, there is sheets and best a tucker for the first salooners aft. Our beef is just like scrapings from the inside of a hide, and the spuds were pulled too early for they're mostly green inside. But from somewhere back amidships there's a smell of cooking waft, and I'd give my earthly prospects for a real good tuck out aft. Ham and egg and coffee aft, say cold fowl for luncheon aft. Juicy grills and toast and cutlets, tucker a la Franksy aft. They feed our women separate, and they make a blessed fuss, just as if they couldn't trust them for to eat along with us. Just because our hands are horny and our hearts are rough with graft, but the gentlemen and ladies always dine together aft, with their ferns and mirrors aft, with their flowers and napkins aft. I'll assist you to an orange, kindly pass the sugar aft. We are shabby, rough and dirty, and our feelings out of tune. And it's hard on fellas forward that was used to go saloon. There's a broken swell among us. He is barracked, he is chaffed, and I wish at times, poor devil, for his own sake he was aft, for they'd understand him aft. He will miss the bathrooms aft. Spite of all, there's no denying that there's finer feelings aft. Last night we watched the moonlight as it spread across the sea. It is hard to make a living, said the broken swell to me. There is ups and downs, I answered, and a bitter laugh he laughed. There were brighter days, and better, when he always travelled aft, with his rug and Gladstone aft, with his cap and spyglass aft. A careless, roving, gay young spark has always travelled aft. There's a notice by the gangway, and it seems to come amiss, for it says that second classers ain't allowed abaft of this, and there ought to be a notice for the fellas from abaft, but the smell and dirt's a warning to the first salooners aft, with their tooth and nail brush aft, with their cuffs and collars aft, their cigars and books and papers, and their cap peaks fore and aft. I want to breathe the morning breeze that blows against the boat, for there's a swelling in my heart, a tightness in my throat. We are forward when there's trouble. We are forward when there's graft. But the men who never battle always seem to travel aft, with their dressing cases aft, with their swell pyjamas aft. Yes, the idle and the careless, they have ease and comfort aft. I feel so low and wretched as I mooch about the deck, that I'm ripe for jumping over, and I wish there was a wreck. We are driven to New Zealand to be shot out over there, scarce a shilling in our pockets, nor a decent rag to wear. With the everlasting worry lest we don't get into graft, there is little left to land for if you cannot travel aft. No anxiety abaft, they have stuff to land with aft. There's little left to land for if you cannot travel aft. But it's grand at sea this morning, and creation almost speaks, sailing past the Bay of Islands, with its pinnacles and peaks, with the sunny haze all round us, and the white caps on the blue, and the orphan rocks and breakers. Oh, it's glorious sailing through. To the south a distant steamer, to the west a coasting craft, and we see the beauty forward, better than if we were aft, spite of opera glasses aft. But, well, they're brothers aft. Nature seems to bring us closer, bring us nearer fore and aft. What's the use of being bitter? What's the use of getting mad? What's the use of being narrow just because your luck is bad? What's the blessed use of fretting like a child that wants the moon? There is broken hearts and trouble in the gilded first saloon. We are used to being shabby. We have got no overdraft. We can laugh at troubles forward that they couldn't laugh at aft. Spite of pride and tone abaft. Keeping up appearance aft. There's anxiety and worry in the breezy cabins aft. But the curse of class distinctions from our shoulders shall be hurled, and the influence of woman revolutionise the world. There'll be higher education for the toiling, starving clown, and the rich and educated shall be educated down. And we all will meet amidships on this stout old earthly craft, and there won't be any friction twixt the classes fore and aft. We'll be brothers fore and aft, yes, and sisters fore and aft, when the people work together and there ain't no fore and aft. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Drover's Sweetheart by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Beth Thomas. An hour before the sun goes down behind the ragged boughs, I go across the little run and bring the dusty cows. And once I used to sit and rest beneath the fading dome, for there was one that I loved best who'd bring the cattle home. Our yard is fixed with double bales, round one the grass is green. The bush is growing through the rails, the spike is rusted in. And 'twas from there his freckled face would turn and smile at me. He'd milk a dozen in the race while I was milking 3. I milk 11 cows myself where once I milked but 4. I set the dishes on the shelf and close the dairy door. And when the glaring sunlight fails and the fire shines through the cracks, I climb the broken stockyard rails and watch the bridle tracks. He kissed me twice and once again, and rode across the hill. The pint pots and the hobble chain, I hear them jingling still. He'll come at night or not at all. He left in dust and heat, and when the soft cool shadows fall is the best time to meet. And he is coming back again, he wrote to let me know. The floods were in the Darling then, it seems so long ago. He'd come through miles of slush and mud, and it was weary work. The creeks were bankers and the flood was 40 miles round Burke. He said the floods had formed a block, the plains could not be crossed, and there was foot rot in the flock and hundreds had been lost. The sheep were falling thick and fast 100 miles from town, and when he reached the line at last, he trucked the remnant down. And so he'll have to stand the cost. His luck was always bad. Instead of making more, he lost the money that he had. And how he'll manage, heaven knows. My eyes are getting dim. He says he don't suppose I'll want to marry him. As if I wouldn't take his hand without a golden glove. Oh, Jack, you men won't understand how much a girl can love. I long to see his face once more. Jack's dog! Thank God, it's Jack! I never thought I'd faint before. He's coming up the track. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Outback by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Son of the Exiles. Outback. The old year went and the new returned in the withering weeks of drought. The cheque was spent that the shearer earned, and the sheds were all cut out. The publican's words were short and few, and the publican's looks were black. And the time had come, as the shearer knew, to carry his swag out back. For time means tucker and tramp you must, where the scrub and plains are wide, with seldom a track that a man can trust, or a mountain peak to guide. All day long in the dust and heat, when summer is on the track, with stinted stomachs and blistered feet, they carry their swags out back. He tramped away from the shanty there, when the days were long and hot, with never a soul to know or care if he died on the track or not. The poor of the city have friends in woe, no matter how much they lack, but only God and the swagmen know how a poor man fares out back. He begged his way on the parched Peru and the Warrego tracks once more, and lived like a dog as the swagmen do till the western station's shore. But the men were many and sheds were full, for work in the town was slack. The traveller never got his hands in wool, though he tramped for a year out back. In stifling noons when his back was wrung by its load and the air seemed dead, and the water warmed in the bag that hung to his aching arm like lead, or in times of flood when plains were seas and the scrubs were cold and black, he ploughed in mud to his trembling knees and paid for his sins out back. He blamed himself in the year too late, in the heaviest hours of life. 'Twas little he dreamed that a shearing mate had care of his home and wife. There are times when wrongs from your kindred come and treacherous tongues attack, when a man is better away from home and dead to the world out back. And dirty and careless and old he wore as his lamp of hope grew dim. He tramped for years till the swag he bore seemed part of himself to him. As a bullock drags in the sandy ruts, he followed the dreary track, with never a thought but to reach the huts when the sun went down out back. It chanced one day when the north wind blew in his face like a furnace breath, he left the track for a tank he knew, 'twas a short-cut to his death. For the bed of the tank was hard and dry and crossed with many a crack, and oh, it's a terrible thing to die of thirst in the scrub out back. A drover came, but the fringe of law was eastward many a mile. He never reported the thing he saw, for it was not worth his while. The tanks are full and the grass is high in the mulga off the track, where the bleaching bones of a white man lie by his mouldering swag out back. For time means tucker and tramp they must, where the scrub and plains are wide, with seldom a track that a man can trust, or a mountain peak to guide. All day long in the flies and heat, the men of the outside track, with stinted stomachs and blistered feet, must carry their swags out back. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Free-Selector's Daughter by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway. 1st of November 2016, Kent. I met her on the Lachlan side, a darling girl I thought her, and ere I left I'd swore I'd win, the Free-Selector's daughter. I milked her father's cows a month, I brought the wood and water, I mended all the broken fence before I won the daughter. I listened to her father's yarns, I did just what I oughter, and what you have to do to win a Free-Selector's daughter. I broke my pipe and burnt my twist and washed my mouth with water. I had a shave before I kissed the Free-Selector's daughter. Then rising in the frosty morn, I brought the cows for Mary, and when I'd milked a bucketful, I took it to the dairy. I poured the milk into the dish, while Mary held the strainer. I summoned heart to speak my wish, and oh, her blush grew plainer. I told her I must leave the place, I said that I would miss her. At first she turned away her face, and then she let me kiss her. I put the bucket on the ground, and in my arms I caught her. I'd give the world to hold again that Free-Selector's daughter. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Sez You by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway. 22nd of November 2016, Kent. When the heavy sand is yielding backward from your blistered feet, and across the distant timber you can see the flowing heat, when your head is hot and aching, and the shadeless plain is wide, and it's 15 miles to water in the scrub the other side, don't give up, don't be downhearted, to a man's strong heart be true. Take the air in through your nostrils, set your lips and see it through, for it can't go on forever, and I'll have my day, says you. When you're camping in the mulga, and the rain is falling slow, while you nurse your rheumatism neath a patch of calico, short of tucker or tobacco, short of sugar or of tea, and the scrubs are dark and dismal, and the plains are like a sea, don't give up and be downhearted, to the soul of man be true. Grin if you've a mate to grin for, grin and jest, and don't look blue, for it can't go on forever, and I'll rise some day, says you. When you've tramped the Sydney pavements till you've counted all the flags, and your flapping boot soles trip you, and your clothes are mostly rags, when you're called a city loafer, shunned, abused, moved on, despised, 50 hungry beggars after every job that's advertised, don't be beaten, hold your head up, to your wretched self be true, set your pride to fight your hunger, be a man in all you do, for it cannot last forever, I will rise again, says you. When you're dotting out in winter, in the darkness and the rain, crouching, cramped and cold and hungry neath a seat in the domain, and a cloaked policeman stirs you with that mighty foot of his. What do you mean? What's this? Who are you? Come, move on, get out of this. Don't get mad, 'twere only foolish. There is naught that you can do, save to mark his beat and time him, find another hole or two. But it can't go on forever. I'll have money yet, says you. Bother not about the morrow, for sufficient to the day is the evil, rather more so. Put your trust in God and pray. Study well the ant, thou sluggard, blessed are the meek and low. Ponder calmly on the lilies, how they idle, how they grow. A man's a man, obey your masters, do not blame the proud and fat, for the poor are always with them, and they cannot alter that. Lay your treasures up in heaven, cling to life and see it through, for it cannot last forever. I shall die some day, says you. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Andy's Gone with Cattle by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Bedell. Our Andy's gone to battle now, 'gainst drought, the red marauder. Our Andy's gone with cattle now, against the Queensland border. He's left us in dejection now, our hearts with him are roving. It's dole on this selection now, since Andy went a-roving. Who now shall wear the cheerful face in times when things are slackest? And who shall whistle round the place when fortune frowns her blackest? Oh, who shall cheek the squatter now when he comes round us snarling? His tongue is growing hotter now since Andy crossed the Darling. The gates are out of order now, in storms the riders rattle, for far across the border now our Andy's gone with cattle. Poor aunties looking thin and white, and uncles cross with worry, and poor old Blucher howls all night since Andy left Macquarie. Oh, may the showers and torrents fall, and all the tanks run over, and may the grass grow green and tall in pathways of the drover, and may good angel send the rain on desert stretches sandy, and when the summer comes again, God grant 'twill bring us Andy. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Jack Dunn of Nevertire by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Mark Smith. Jack Dunn of Nevertire. It chanced upon the very day we'd got the shearing done. A buggy brought a stranger to the West Sunday run. He had a round and jolly face, and he was sleek and stout. He drove right up between the huts and called the super out. We chaps were smoking after tea and heard the swell inquire for one as travelled by the name of Dunn of Nevertire. Jack Dunn of Nevertire. Poor Dunn of Nevertire. There wasn't one of us but knew Jack Dunn of Nevertire. Jack Dunn of Nevertire, he said, I was a mate of his, and now it's 20 years since I set eyes upon his phiz. There is no whiter man than Jack, no straighter south the line. There is no hand in all the land I'd sooner grip in mine. To help a mate in trouble, Jack would go through flood and fire. Great Scott! And don't you know the name of Dunn of Nevertire? Big Dunn of Nevertire. Long Jack from Nevertire. He stuck to me through thick and thin, Jack Dunn of Nevertire. I did a wild and foolish thing while Jack and I were mates, and I disgraced my governor's name and wished to try the States. My lamps were turned to Yankee land, for I'd some people there, and I was right when someone sent the money for my fare. I thought 'twas Dad until I took the trouble to inquire, and found that he who sent the stuff was Dunn of Nevertire. Jack Dunn of Nevertire. Soft Dunn of Nevertire. He'd won some money on a race, Jack Dunn of Nevertire. Now I've returned by Liverpool, a swell of Yankee brand, to reckon, guess, and calculate, and wake my native land. There is no better land, I swear, in all the wide world round. I smelt the bush a month before we touched King George's Sound, and now I've come to settle down. The top of my desire is just to meet a mate of mine called Dunn of Nevertire. Was raised at Nevertire, the town of Nevertire. He humped his bluey by the name of Dunn of Nevertire. I've heard he's poor, and if he is, a proud old fool is he. But, spite of that, I'll find a way to fix the old gum tree. I bought a station in the north, the best that could be had. I want a man to pick the stock. I want a super bad. I want no bully brute to boss, no crawling, sneaking liar. My station super's name shall be Jack Dunn of Nevertire. Straight Dunn of Nevertire. Old Dunn of Nevertire. I guess he's known up Queensland way. Jack Dunn of Nevertire. The super said, while to his face a strange expression came, I think I've seen the man you want. I think I know the name. Had he a jolly kind of face, a free and careless way? Gray eyes that always seemed to smile, and hair just turning gray? Clean shaved, except a light mustache, long-limbed and tough as wire. That's him! That's Dunn! The stranger roared. Jack Dunn of Nevertire! John Dunn of Nevertire! Jack D. from Nevertire! They said I'd find him here, the cuss! Jack Dunn of Nevertire. I'd know his walk, the stranger cried, though sobered, I'll allow. I doubt it much, the boss replied. He don't walk that way now. Perhaps he don't, the stranger said, for years were hard on Jack. but if he were a mile away, I swear I'd know his back." "I doubt it much," the super said, and sadly puffed his briar. "I guess he wears a pair of wings, Jack Dunn of Nevertire. Jack Dunn of Nevertire, brave Dunn of Nevertire. He caught a fever nursing me, Jack Dunn of Nevertire." We took the stranger round to where a gum tree stood alone, and in the grass beside the trunk he saw a granite stone. The names of Dunn and Nevertire were plainly written there. "I'm all broke up," the stranger said, in sorrow and despair. "I guess he has a wider run, the man that I require. He's got a river frontage now, Jack Dunn of Nevertire. Straight Dunn of Nevertire. White Jack from Nevertire. I guess St. Peter knew the name of Dunn of Nevertire." End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Trooper Campbell by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Beth Thomas, Melbourne, Australia. One day, old Trooper Campbell rode out to Blackman's Run. His cap peak and his sabre were glancing in the sun. 'Twas New Year's Eve, and slowly across the ridges low the sad old year was drifting to where the old years go. The trooper's mind was reading the love page of his life, his love for Mary Wiley, ere she was Blackman's wife. He sorrowed for the sorrows of the heart a rival won, for he knew that there was trouble out there on Blackman's Run. The sapling shades had lengthened, the summer day was late, when Blackman met the trooper beyond the homestead gate. And if the hand of trouble can leave a lasting trace, the lines of care had come to stay on poor old Blackman's face. "Not good day, Trooper Campbell, it's a bad, bad day for me. You are of all the men on earth the one I wish to see. The great black clouds of trouble above our homestead hang. That wild and reckless boy of mine has joined M'Durmer's gang. Oh, save him, Campbell, I beg in friendship's name, for if they take and hang him, the wife would die of shame. Could Mary or her sisters hold up their heads again and face a woman's malice or claim the love of men? And if he does a murder, 'twere better he were dead. Don't take him, Trooper Campbell, if a price be on his head, but shoot him, Campbell, when you meet him face to face, and save him from the gallows and us from that disgrace." "Now, Tom," cried Trooper Campbell, "you know your words are wild. Though he is wild and reckless, yet still he is your child. So bear up in your trouble, and meet it like a man, and tell the wife and daughters I'll save him if I can." The sad Australian sunset had faded from the west, but night brings darker shadows to hearts that cannot rest. And Blackman's wife sat rocking and moaning in her chair. "I cannot bear disgrace," she moaned. "Disgrace I cannot bear. In hardship and in trouble I struggled year by year to make my children better than other children here. And if my son's a felon, how can I show my face? I cannot bear disgrace, my God, I cannot bear disgrace. Ah, God in heaven, pardon, I'm selfish in my woe. My boy is better-hearted than many that I know, and I will face the world's disgrace. And, till his mother's dead, my foolish child shall find a place to lay his outlawed head." With a sad heart Trooper Campbell rode back from Blackman's Run, nor noticed aught about him till 13 miles were done, when close beside a cutting he heard the click of locks, and saw the rifle muzzles were on him from the rocks. But suddenly a youth rode out, and close by Campbell's side, "Don't fire! Don't fire, in heaven's name! It's Campbell, boys!" he cried. Then one by one, in silence, the levelled rifles fell, for who'd shoot Trooper Campbell of those who knew him well? Oh, bravely sat old Campbell, no sign of fear showed he. He slowly drew his carbine, it rested on his knee. The outlaws' guns were lifted, but none the silence broke, till steadfastly and firmly old Trooper Campbell spoke. "That boy that you would ruin, goes home with me, my men, or some of us shall never ride through the gap again. You know old Trooper Campbell, and have you ever heard that bluff or lead could turn him, that ere he broke his word? That reckless lad is playing a heartless villain's part. He knows that he is breaking his poor old mother's heart. He'll bring a curse upon himself, but 'tis not that alone. He'll bring dishonour to a name that I'd be proud to own. I speak to you, mtamburr, if your heart's not hardened quite, and if you'd seen the trouble at Blackman's home this night, you'd help me now, mtamburr. I speak as man to man. I swore to save that foolish lad, and I'll save him if I can. Oh, take him, said mtamburr. He's got a horse to ride. The youngster thought a moment, then rode to Campbell's side. Goodbye, the outlaws shouted, as up the range they sped. A Merry New Year, Campbell, was all mtamburr said. Then fast along the ridges 2 bushmen rode a race, and the moonlight lent a glory to Trooper Campbell's face. And ere the New Year's dawning they reached the home at last, and this is but a story of trouble that is past. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Sliprails and the Spur by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway on 12th of December 2016, Kent. The colours of the setting sun withdrew across the western land. He raised the Sliprails one by one and shot them home with trembling hand. Her brown hands clung, her face grew pale, quivering chin and eyes that brim. One quick fierce kiss across the rail, and goodbye Mary, goodbye Jim. Oh, he rides hard to race the pain, who rides from love, who rides from home, but he rides slowly home again, whose heart has learnt to love and roam. A hand upon the horse's mane, and one foot in the stirrup set, and stooping back to kiss again, with goodbye Mary, don't you fret. When I come back, he laughed for her, we do not know how soon 'twill be. I'll whistle as I round the spur, you let the Sliprails down for me. She gasped for sudden loss of hope, as with a backward wave to her, he cantered down the grassy slope, and swiftly round the darkening spur. Black pencilled panels standing high, and darkness fading into stars, and blurring fast against the sky, a faint white form beside the bars. And often at the set of sun, in winter bleak and summer brown, she'd steal across the little run, and shyly let the Sliprails down, and listen there when darkness shut the nearer spur in silence deep, and when they called her from the hut, steal home and cry herself to sleep. Some editions have 4 more lines here. And he rides hard to dull the pain, who rides from one that loves him best, and he rides slowly back again, whose restless heart must rove for rest. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Past Carin by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway. 5th of November 2016, Kent. Now up and down the siding brown the great black crows are flying, and down below the spur I know another milker's dying. The crops have withered from the ground, the tank clay's bed is glaring, but from my heart no tear, no sound, for I have gone past caring, past worrying or caring, past feeling aught or caring, but from my heart no tear, no sound, for I have gone past caring. Through death and trouble turn about, through hopeless desolation, through flood and fever, fire and drought, and slavery and starvation, through childbirth, sickness, hurt and blight, and nervousness and scaring, through being left alone at night, I've got to be past caring, past bothering or caring, past feeling and past caring, through city cheats and neighbours' spite, I've come to be past caring. Our first child took in days like this, a cruel week in dying, all day upon her father's knees, and on my poor breast lying. The tears we shed, the prayers we said, were awful, wild, despairing. I've pulled 3 through, and buried 2 since then, and I'm past caring. I've grown to be past caring, past worrying and wearing. I've pulled 3 through and buried 2 since then, and I'm past caring. 'Twas 10 years first, then came the worst, all for a dusty clearing. I thought my heart would burst when first my man went shearing. He's droving in the great northwest, I don't know how he's faring, for I, the one that loved him best, have grown to be past caring. I've grown to be past caring, past looking for or caring. The girl that waited long ago has lived to be past caring. My eyes are dry, I cannot cry, I've got no heart for breaking, but where it was in days gone by, a dull and empty aching. My last boy ran away from me, I know my temper's wearing, but now I only wish to be beyond all signs of caring, past worrying or caring, past feeling and despairing, and now I only wish to be beyond all signs of caring. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Glass on the Bar by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Rick of Las Vegas, Nevada. 3 bushmen one morning rode up to an inn, and one of them called for the drinks with a grin. They had only returned from a trip to the north, and eager to greet them, the landlord came forth. He absently poured out a glass of 3 Star, and set down that drink with the rest on the bar. "There, that is for Harry," he said, "and it's queer. 'Tis the very same glass that he drank from last year. His name's on the glass, you can read it like print. He scratched it himself with an old piece of flint. I remember his drink, it was always 3 Star." And the landlord looked out through the door of the bar. He looked at the horses and counted but 3. "You are always together, where's Harry?" cried he. Oh, sadly they looked at the glass as they said, "You may put it away, for our old mate is dead." But one, gazing out o'er the ridges afar, said, "We owe him a shout, leave the glass on the bar." They thought of the faraway grave on the plain, they thought of the comrade who came not again. They lifted their glasses, and sadly they said, "We drink to the name of the mate who is dead." And the sunlight streamed in, and a light like a star seemed to glow in the depth of the glass on the bar. And still in that shanty a tumbler is seen. It stands by the clock, ever polished and clean. And often the strangers will read as they pass the name of a bushman engraved on the glass. And though on the shelf but a dozen there are, that glass never stands with the rest on the bar. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Shanty on the Rise by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org. When the caravans of wool teams climbed the ranges from the west, on a spur among the mountains stood the bullock driver's rest. It was built of bark and saplings, and was rather rough inside, but 'twas good enough for bushmen in the careless days that died. Just a quiet little shanty, kept by something in disguise, as the bushmen called the landlord of the Shanty on the Rise. City swells, who do the royal, would have called the shanty low, but 'twas better far and purer than some tony pubs I know. For the patrons of the shanty had the principles of men, and the spieler, if he struck it, wasn't welcome there again. You could smoke and drink in quiet, yarn, or else soliloquize, with a decent lot of fellows in the Shanty on the Rise. 'Twas the bullock driver's haven when his team was on the road, and the wagon wheels were groaning as they ploughed beneath the load. And I mind how weary teamsters struggled on while it was light, just to camp within a cooey of the shanty for the night. And I think the very bullocks raised their heads and fixed their eyes on the candle in the window of the Shanty on the Rise. And the bullock bells were clanking from the marshes on the flats, as we hurried to the shanty, where we hung our dripping hats, and we took a drop of something that was brought at our desire, as we stood with steaming moleskins in the kitchen by the fire. Oh, it roared upon a fireplace of the good old-fashioned size, when the rain came down the chimney of the shanty on the rise. They got up a Christmas party in the shanty long ago, while I camped with Jimmy Nolet on the river bank below. Poor old Jim was in his glory, they'd elected him M.C., for there wasn't such another raving lunatic as he. "Mr. Nolet, Mr. Swaller," shouted something in disguise, as we walked into the parlour of the shanty on the rise. "There is little real pleasure in the city where I am, and there's a soiree round the corner with its mockery and sham, but a fellow can be happy when around the room he whirls in a party up the country with the jolly country girls. Why, at times I almost fancied I was dancing on the skies when I danced with Mary Carey in the shanty on the rise." Jimmy came to me and whispered, and I muttered, "Go along," but he shouted, "Mr. Swaller will oblige us with a song," and at first I said I wouldn't, and I shammed a little too, till the girls began to whisper, "Mr. Swallow, no, I do." So I sang of something about the love that never dies, and the chorus shook the rafters of the shanty on the rise. Jimmy burst his concertina, and the bullock drivers went for the corpse of Joe the fiddler, who was sleeping in his tent. Joe was tired and had lumbago, and he wouldn't come, he said, but the case was very urgent, so they pulled him out of bed, and they fetched him, for the bushmen knew that something in disguise had a cure for Joe's lumbago in the shanty on the rise. Jim and I were rather quiet while escorting Mary home 'neath the stars that hung in clusters near and distant from the dome, and we walked so very silent, being lost in reverie, that we heard the settlers' matches rustle softly on the tree. And I wondered who would win her when she said her sweet goodbyes, but she died at 21, and was buried on the rise. I suppose the shanty vanished from the ranges long ago, and the girls are mostly married to the chaps I used to know. My old chums are in the distance, some have crossed the border line, but in fancy still their glasses chink against the rim of mine, and upon the very centre of the greenest spot that lies in my fondest recollection stands the shanty on the rise. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Vagabond by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Larry Wilson. White handkerchiefs wave from the short black pier as we glide to the grand old sea, but the song of my heart is for none to hear if one of them waves for me. A roving, roaming life is mine, ever by field or flood, for not far back in my father's line was a dash of the gypsy blood. Flax and tussock and fern, gum and mulga and sand, reef and palm, but my fancies turn ever away from land. Strange wild cities in ancient state, range and river and tree, snow and ice, but my star of fate is ever across the sea. A godlike ride on a thundering sea when all but the stars are blind, a desperate race from eternity with a gale and a half behind, a jovial spree in the cabin at night, a song on the rolling deck, a lark ashore with the ships in sight, till a wreck goes down with a wreck. A smoke and a yarn on the deck by day, when life is a waking dream, and care and trouble so far away that out of your life they seem, a roving spirit in sympathy, who has travelled the whole world o'er. My heart forgets in a week at sea the trouble of years on shore. A rolling stone, 'tis a saw for slaves, philosophy is old, wear out or break 'neath the feet of knaves, or rot in your bed of mould. But I'd rather trust to the darkest skies and the wildest seas that roar, or die where the stars of nations rise in the stormy clouds of war. Cleave to your country, home, and friends, die in a sordid strife. You can count your friends on your finger ends in the critical hours of life. Sacrifice all for the family's sake, bow to their selfish rule, slave till your big soft heart they break, the heart of the family fool. Domestic quarrels and family spite and your native land may be controlled by custom, but come what might, the rest of the world is for me. I'd sail with money or sail without. If your love be forced from home, and you dare enough, and your heart be stout, the world is your own to roam. I've never a love that can sting my pride, nor a friend to prove untrue, for I leave my love ere the turning tide, and my friends are all too new. The curse of the powers on a peace like ours, with its greed and its treachery, a stranger's hand and a stranger land, and the rest of the world for me. But why be bitter? The world is cold to one with a frozen heart. New friends are often so like the old they seem of the past a part. As a better part of the past appears when enemies parted long are come together in kinder years with their better nature strong. I had a friend ere my first ship sailed, a friend that I never deserved, for the selfish strain in my blood prevailed as soon as my turn was served. And the memory haunts my heart with shame, or rather the pride that's there, in different guises, but soul the same, I meet him everywhere. I had a chum. When the times were tight, we starved in Australian scrubs. We froze together in parks at night, and laughed together in pubs. And I often hear a laugh like his from a sense of humour keen, and catch a glimpse in a passing fizz of his broad, good-natured grin. And I had a love. 'Twas a love to prize, but I never went back again. I have seen the light of her kind brown eyes in many a face since then. The sailors say 'twill be rough to-night, as they fasten the hatches down. The south is black, and the bars white, and the drifting smoke is brown. The gold has gone from the western haze, and the sea birds circle and swarm, but we shall have plenty of sunny days, and little enough of storm. The hill is hiding the short black pier, and the last white signals seen. The points run in, and the houses veer, and the great bluff stands between. So darkness swallows each far white speck on many a wharf and quay. The night comes down on a restless deck, grim cliffs, and the open sea. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Sweeney by Henry Lawson, read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway, 6th of November 2016, Kent. It was somewhere in September, and the sun was going down, when I came in search of copy to a darling river town. Come and have a drink, we call it, 'tis a fitting name, I think, and 'twas raining for a wonder at Come and Have a Drink. 'Neath the public house veranda I was resting on a bunk, when a stranger rose before me, and he said that he was drunk. He apologised for speaking, there was no offence, he swore, but he somehow seemed to fancy that he'd seen my face before. No offence, he said. I told him that he needn't mention it, for I might have met him somewhere, I had travelled round a bit, and I knew a lot of fellas in the bush and in the streets, but a fella can't remember all the fellas that he meets. Very old and thin and dirty were the garments that he wore, just a shirt and pair of trousers and a boot and nothing more. He was wringing wet and really in a sad and sinful plight, and his hat was in his left hand and his bottle in his right. His brow was broad and roomy, but its lines were somewhat harsh, and a sensual mouth was hidden by a drooping fair moustache. His hairy chest was open to what poets call the wind, and I would have bet 1,000 that his pants were gone behind. He agreed you can't remember all the chaps you chanced to meet, and he said his name was Sweeney, people lived in Sussex Street. He was camping in a stable, but he swore that he was right, only for the blankly horses walking over him all night. He'd apparently been fighting, for his face was black and blue, and he looked as though the horses had been treading on him too. But an honest genial twinkle in the eye that wasn't hurt seemed to hint of something better, spite of drink and rags and dirt. It appeared that he mistook me for a long-lost mate of his, one of whom I was the image, both in figure and in phiz. He'd had a letter from him if the chap were living still, for they'd carried swags together from the Gulf to Broken Hill. Sweeney yarned a while and hinted that his folks were doing well, and he told me that his father kept the Southern Cross Hotel, and I wonder if his absence was regarded as a loss when he left the elder Sweeney, landlord of the Southern Cross. He was born in Parramatta, and he said with humour grin that he'd like to see the city ere the liquor finished him, but he couldn't raise the money. He was damned if he could think what the government was doing. Here he offered me a drink. I declined was self-denial, and I lectured him on booze, using all the hackneyed arguments that preachers mostly use, things I'd heard in temperance lectures. I was young and rather green, and I ended by referring to the man he might have been. Then a wise expression struggled with the bruises on his face, though his argument had scarcely any bearing on the case. What's the good of keeping sober? Fellas rise and fellas fall. What I might have been and wasn't doesn't trouble me at all. But he couldn't stay to argue, for his beer was nearly gone. He was glad, he said, to meet me, and he'd see me later on. He guessed he'd have to go and get his bottle filled again, and he gave a lurch and vanished in the darkness and the rain. And of afternoon in cities, when the rain is on the land, visions come to me of Sweeney with his bottle in his hand, with the stormy night behind him and the pub veranda post, and I wonder why he haunts me more than any other ghost. Still I see the shearers drinking at the township in the scrub, and the army praying nightly at the door of every pub, and the girls who flirt and giggle with the bushmen from the west, but the memory of Sweeney overshadows all the rest. Well, perhaps it isn't funny, there were links between us two. He had memories of cities, he had been a jackaroo, and perhaps his face forewarned me of a face that I might see, from a bitter cup reflected in the wretched days to be. I suppose he's tramping somewhere where the bushmen carry swags, cadging round the wretched stations with his empty tucker bags, and I fancy that of evenings when the track is growing dim, what he might have been and wasn't comes along and troubles him. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Middleton's Rouseabout by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway on the 1st of December 2016, Kent. Tall and freckled and sandy, face of a country lout. This was the picture of Andy, Middleton's Rouseabout. Type of a coming nation in the land of cattle and sheep. Worked on Middleton station, £1 a week in his keep. On Middleton's wide dominions, piled the stockwhip and shears. Hadn't any opinions, hadn't any ideas. Swiftly the years went over, liquor and drought prevailed. Middleton went as a drover, after his station had failed. Type of a careless nation, men who are soon played out. Middleton was, and his station was bought by the Rouseabout. Flourishing beard and sandy, tall and robust and stout. This is the picture of Andy, Middleton's Rouseabout. Now on his own dominions, works with his overseers, hasn't any opinions, hasn't any ideas. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Ballad of the Drover by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway. 2nd of November 2016, Kent. Across the stony ridges, across the rolling plain, young Harry Dale the drover comes riding home again. And well his stock horse bears him, and light of heart is he, and stoutly his old pack horse is trotting by his knee. Up Queensland way with cattle he travelled regions vast, and many months have vanished since home folk saw him last. He hums a song of someone he hopes to marry soon, and hobble chains and campware keep jingling to the tune. Beyond the hazy dado, against the lower skies, and yon blue line of ranges, the homestead station lies, and thitherward the drover jogs through the lazy noon, while hobble chains and campware are jingling to a tune. An hour has filled the heavens with storm clouds inky black. At times the lightning trickles around the drover's track, but Harry pushes onward, his horse's strength he tries, in hope to reach the river before the flood shall rise. The thunder from above him goes rolling over the plain, and down on thirsty pastures in torrents falls the rain, and every creek and gully sends forth its little flood, till the river runs a banker all stained with yellow mud. Now Harry speaks to Rover, the best dog on the plains, and to his hardy horses, and strokes their shaggy manes. We've breasted bigger rivers when floods were at their height, nor shall this gutter stop us from getting home tonight. The thunder growls a warning, the ghastly lightnings gleam, as the drover turns his horses to swim the fatal stream. But oh, the flood runs stronger than e'er it run before, the saddle horse is failing, and only halfway o'er. When flashes next the lightning, the flood's grey breast is blank, and a cattle dog and pack horse are struggling up the bank. But in the lonely homestead the girl will wait in vain, he'll never pass the stations in charge of stock again. The faithful dog a moment sits panting on the bank, and then swims through the current to where his master sank, and round in circles he fights with failing strength, till borne down by the waters the old dog sinks at length. Across the flooded lowlands and slopes of sodden loam, the pack-horse struggles onward to take dumb tidings home, and mud-stained wet and weary through ranges dark goes he, while hobble chains and tinware are sounding eerily. The floods are in the ocean, the stream is clear again, and now a verdant carpet is stretched across the plain, but someone's eyes are saddened and someone's heart still bleeds in sorrow for the drover who sleeps among the reeds. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Taking His Chance by Henry Lawson, read for LibriVox.org by Carol Bedell. They stood by the door of the inn on the rise. May Carney looked up in the bushranger's eyes. "Oh, why did you come? It was mad of you, Jack. You know that the troopers are out on your track." A laugh and a shake of his obstinate head. "I wanted a dance, and I'll chance it," he said. Some 20-odd bushmen had come to the ball, but Jack from his youth had been known to them all. And bushmen are soft where a woman is fair, so the love of May Carney protected him there. And all the short evening, it seems like romance, she danced with the bushranger taking his chance. 'Twas midnight, the dancers stood suddenly still, for hoofs had been heard on the side of the hill. Ben Duggan, the drover, along the hillside came riding as only a bushman can ride. He sprang from his horse, to the shanty he sped. "The troopers are down in the gully," he said. Quite close to the homestead the troopers were seen. "Clear out and ride hard for the rangers, Jack Dean." "Be quick," said May Carney, her hand on her heart. "We'll bluff them a while, and 'twill give you a start." He lingered a moment, to kiss her, of course, then ran to the trees where he'd hobbled his horse. She ran to the gate, and the troopers were there. The jingle of hobbles came faint on the air. Then loudly she screamed. It was only to drown the treacherous clatter of sliprails let down. But troopers are sharp, and she saw at a glance that someone was taking a desperate chance. They chased and they shouted, "Surrender, Jack Dean!" They called him 3 times in the name of the Queen. Then came from the darkness the clicking of locks. The crack of the rifles was heard in the rocks. A shriek and a shout and a rush of pale men, and there lay the bushranger, chancing it then. The sergeant dismounted and knelt on the sod. "Your bushranging's over. Make peace, Jack, with God." The bushranger laughed. Not a word he replied, but turned to the girl who knelt down by his side. He gazed in her eyes as she lifted his head. "Just kiss me, my girl, and I'll chance it," he said. End of poem.
This recording is in the public domain.
When the Army Prays for Watty by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway, 31st of October 2016, Kent. When the kindly hours of darkness save for light of moon and star, hide the picture on the signboard over Doughty's horse bizarre, when the last road tint is fading on the distant mulga scrub, then the Army prays for Watty at the entrance of his pub. Now I often sit at Watty's when the night is very near, with a head that's full of jingles and the fumes of bottled beer, for I always have a fancy that if I'm over there, when the Army prays for Watty, I'm included in the prayer. Watty lounges in his armchair in its old accustomed place, with a fatherly expression on his round and passive face, and his arms are clasped before him in a calm, contented way, and he nods his head and dozes when he hears the Army pray. And I wonder, does he ponder on the distant years and dim, or he chances over yonder when the Army prays for him? Has he not a fear connected with a warm place down below, where according to good Christians all the publicans should go? But his features give no token of a feeling in his breast, save for peace that is unbroken and a conscience well at rest. And we guzzle as we guzzled long before the Army came, and the loafers wait for shouters, and they get there just the same. It would take a lot of praying, lots of thumping on the drum, to prepare a sinful strain in souls for kingdom come. But I love my fellow sinners, and I hope upon the whole that the Army gets a hearing when it prays for Watty's soul. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Wreck of the Derry Castle by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Tamburino. Day of ending, for beginnings. Ocean hath another innings. Ocean hath another score. And the surges sing his winnings. And the surges shout his winnings. And the surges shriek his winnings. All along the sullen shore. Sing another dirge in wailing, for another vessel sailing with the shadow ships at sea, shadow ships forever sinking, shadow ships whose pumps are clinking, and whose thirsty holds are drinking pledges to eternity. Pray for souls of ghastly sodden, corpses floating round untrodden, cliffs where naught but sea drift strays, souls of dead men in whose faces of humanity no traces, not a mark to show their races, floating round for days and days. Ocean's salty tongues are licking round the faces of the drowned, and a cruel blade seems sticking through my heart and turning round. Heaven, shall his ghastly sodden corpse float round for days and days? Shall it dash 'neath cliffs untrodden, rocks where naught but sea drift strays? God in heaven, hide the floating, falling, rising face from me. God in heaven, stay the gloating, mocking singing of the sea. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Ben Duggan by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway on the 30th of December 2016, Kent. Jack Denver died on Talbragar when Christmas Eve began, and there was sorrow round the place, for Denver was a man. Jack Denver's wife bowed down her head, her daughter's grief was wild, and big Ben Duggan by the bed stood sobbing like a child. But big Ben Duggan saddled up and galloped fast and far to raise the longest funeral ever seen on Talbragar. By station home and shearing shed, Ben Duggan cried, "Jack Denver's dead, roll up at Talbragar." He borrowed horses here and there and rode all Christmas Eve, and scarcely paused a moment's time the mournful news to leave. He rode by lonely huts and farms, and when the day was done, he turned his panting horse's head and rode to Ross's Run. No bushman in a single day had ridden half so far since Johnson brought the doctor to his wife at Talbragar. By diggers' camps Ben Duggan sped, at each he cried, "Jack Denver's dead, roll up at Talbragar." That night he passed the humpies of the splitters on the ridge, and roused the bullock drivers camped at Belinfante's bridge. And as he climbed the ridge again, the moon shone on the rise. The soft white moonbeams glistened in the tears that filled his eyes. He dashed the rebel drops away, for blinding things they are, but 'twas his best and truest friend who died on Talbragar. At Blackman's Run, before the dawn, Ben Duggan cried, "Poor Denver's gone, roll up at Talbragar." At all the shanties round the place they'd heard his horse's tramp. He took the track to Wilson's Luck and told the diggers' camp. But in the gorge by Deadman's Gap the mountain shades were black, and there a newly fallen tree was lying on the track. He saw too late, and then he heard the swift hoof's sudden jar, and big Ben Duggan ne'er again rode home to Talbragar. "The wretch is drunk, and Denver's dead, a burning shame," the people said next day at Talbragar. For 30 miles round Talbragar the boys rolled up in strength, and Denver had a funeral a good long mile in length. Round Denver's grave that Christmas day rough bushmen's eyes were dim. The western bushmen knew the way to bury dead like him. But some returning homeward found, by light of moon and star, Ben Duggan dying in the rocks 5 miles from Talbragar. They knelt around, he raised his head, and faintly gasped, "Jack Denver's dead, roll up at Talbragar." But 1 short hour before he died he woke to understand. They told him when he asked them that the funeral was grand. And then there came into his eyes a strange victorious light. He smiled on them in triumph, and his great soul took its flight. And still the careless bushmen tell by tent and shanty bar how Duggan raised a funeral years back on Talbragar. And far and wide, when Duggan died, the bushmen of the western side rode into Talbragar. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Star of Australasia by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org. We boast no more of our bloodless flag that rose from a nation's slime. Better a shred of a deep-dyed rag from the storms of the olden time. From grander clouds in our peaceful skies than ever were there before, I tell you, the Star of the South shall rise in the lurid clouds of war. It ever must be while blood is warm and the sons of men increase, for ever the nations rose in storm to rot in a deadly peace. There comes a point that we will not yield, no matter if right or wrong, and man will fight on the battlefield while passion and pride are strong, so long as he will not kiss the rod, and his stubborn spirit sours, and the scorn of nature and curse of God are heavy on peace like ours. There are boys out there by the western creeks who hurry away from school to climb the sides of the breezy peaks or dive in the shaded pool, who'll stick to their guns when the mountains quake to the tread of a mighty war, and fight for right or a grand mistake as men never fought before. When the peaks are scarred and the sea walls crack till the furthest hills vibrate, and the world for a while goes rolling back in a storm of love and hate. There are boys today in the city slum and the home of wealth and pride, who'll have one home when the storm is come and fight for it side by side, who'll hold the cliffs 'gainst the armored hells that batter a coastal town, or grimly die in a hail of shells when the walls come crashing down. And many a pink-white baby girl, the queen of her home today, shall see the wings of the tempest swirl the mist of our dawn away, shall live to shudder and stop her ears to the thud of a distant gun, and know the sorrow that has no tears when a battle is lost and won. as a mother or wife in the years to come will kneel wild-eyed and white, and pray to God in her darkened home for the men in the fort tonight. But oh, if the cavalry charge again as they did when the world was wide, 'twill be grand in the ranks of 1,000 men in that glorious race to ride, and strike for all that is true and strong, for all that is grand and brave, and all that ever shall be, so long as man has a soul to save. He must lift the saddle, and close his wings, and shut his angels out, and steel his heart for the end of things, who'd ride with a stockman scout. When the race they ride on the battle track, and the waning distance hums, and the shelled sky shrieks or the rifles crack like stockwhip amongst the gums, and the strait is reached, and the field is gapped, and the hoof-torn sward grows red, with the blood of those who are handicapped with iron and steel and lead, and the gaps are filled through unseen eyes with the spirit and with the shades of the world-wide rebel dead who'll rise and rush with the bush brigades. All creeds and trades will have soldiers there, give every class its due, and there'll be many a clerk to spare for the pride of the jackaroo. They'll fight for honour and fight for love, and a few will fight for gold, for the devil below and for God above, as our fathers fought of old. And some half blind with exultant tears, and some stiff-lipped, stern-eyed, for the pride of 1,000 after years, and the old eternal pride. The soul of the world they will feel and see in the chase and the grim retreat. They'll know the glory of victory and the grandeur of defeat. The South will wake to a mighty change ere 100 years are done, with arsenals west of the mountain range and every spur its gun. And many a rickety son of a gun on the tides of the future tossed will tell how battles were really won that history says were lost, will trace the field with his pipe and shirk the facts that are hard to explain, as grey old mates of the diggings work the old ground over again. How this was our centre, and this a redoubt, and that was a scrub in the rear, and this was the point where the guards held out, and the enemy's lines were here. They'll tell the tales of the nights before, and the tales of the ship and fort, till the sons of Australia take to war as their fathers took to sport. Their breath come deep and their eyes grow bright at the tales of our chivalry, and every boy will want to fight, no matter what cause it be. When the children run to the doors and cry, "Oh, mother, the troops are come!" and every heart in the town leaps high at the first loud thud of the drum, they'll know, apart from its mystic charm, what music is at last, when, proud as a boy with a broken arm, the regiment marches past. And the veriest wreck in the drink-fiend's clutch, no matter how low or mean, will feel, when he hears the march, a touch of the man that he might have been. And fools, when the fiends of war are out and the city skies aflame, will have something better to talk about than an absent woman's shame, will have something nobler to do by far than jest at a friend's expense, or blacken a name in a public bar, or over a backyard fence. And this you learn from the libelled past, though its methods were somewhat rude. A nation's born where the shells fall fast, or its lease of life renewed. We in part atone for the ghoulish strife, and the crimes of the peace we boast, and the better part of a people's life in this storm comes uppermost. The self-same spirit that drives the man to the depths of drink and crime will do the deeds in the hero's van that live till the end of time. The living death in the lonely bush, the greed of the selfish town, and even the creed of the outlawed push is chivalry upside down. 'Twill be, while ever our blood is hot, while ever the world goes wrong, the nations rise in a war to rot in a peace that lasts too long, and Southern nation and Southern state, aroused from their dream of ease, must sign in the book of eternal fate their stormy histories. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Great Grey Plain by Henry Lawson, read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway, 6th of November 2016, Kent. Out west where the stars are brightest, where the scorching north wind blows, and the bones of the dead gleam whitest, and the sun of the desert glows, yet within the selfish kingdom, where man starves man for gain, where white men tramp for existence, wide lies the great grey plain. No break in its awful horizon, no blur in the dazzling haze, save where by the bordering timber the fierce white heat waves blaze, and out where the tank heap rises or looms where the sunlight's wane, till it seems like a distant mountain low down on the great grey plain. No sign of a stream or fountain, no spring on its dry hot breast, no shade from the blazing noontide where a weary man might rest. Whole years go by when the glowing sky never clouds for rain, only the shrubs of the desert grow on the great grey plain. From the camp while the rich man's dreaming come the traveller and his mate, in the ghastly dawnlight seeming like a swagman's ghost out late, and the horseman blurs in the distance while still the stars remain, a low faint dust cloud haunting his track on the great grey plain. And all day long from before them the mirage smokes away, that daylight ghost of an ocean creeps close behind all day, with an evil snake-like motion, as the waves of a madman's brain. 'Tis a phantom not like water, out there on the great grey plain. There's a run on the western limit, where a man lives like a beast, and a shanty in the mulga that stretches to the east, and the hopeless men who carry their swags and tramp in pain. The footman must not tarry out there on the great grey plain. Out west where the stars are brightest, where the scorching north wind blows, and the bones of the dead seem whitest, and the sun on a desert glows. Out back in the hungry distance that brave hearts dare in vain, where beggars tramp for existence, there lies the great grey plain. 'Tis a desert not more barren than the great grey plain of years, when a fierce fire burns the hearts of men, dries up the fount of tears, where the victims of a greed insane are crushed in the hell-born strife, where the souls of a race are murdered on the great grey plain of life. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Song of Old Joe Swallow by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway on the 1st of December 2016, Kent. When I was up the country in the rough and early days, I used to work along a Jimmy Nowlett's bullock drays. Then the real road wasn't heerd on, and the bush was wild and strange, and we used to draw the timber from the saw pits in the range, load provisions for the stations, and we'd travel far and slow through the plains and cross the ranges in the days of long ago. Then it's yoke up the bullocks and tramp beside 'em slow, and saddle up your horses and a riding we will go, to the bullock driving, cattle droving, nigger, digger, roaring, roving days of long ago. Once me and Jimmy Nowlett loaded timber for the town, but we hadn't gone a dozen mile before the rain came down, and me and Jimmy Nowlett and the bullocks and the dray was cut off on some rising ground while floods around us lay, and we soon run short of tucker and tobacco, which was bad, and potato dipped in honey was the only tuck we had. And half our bullocks perished when the drought was on the land, and the burning heat dazzles as it dances on the sand, when the sun-baked clay and gravel paves for miles the burning creeks, and at every step you travel there a rotting carcass reeks. But we pulled ourselves together, for we never used to know what a feather bed was good for in those days of long ago. But in spite of barren ridges, and in spite of mud and heat, and dust that browned the bushes when it rose from bullocks' feet, and in spite of cold and chilblains when the bush was white with frost, and in spite of muddy water where the burning plain was crossed, and in spite of modern progress, and in spite of all their blow, 'twas a better land to live in the days of long ago. When the frosty moon was shining o'er the ranges like a lamp, and a lot of bullock drivers was a-camping on the camp, when the fire was blazing cheery and the pipes was drawing well, then our songs we used to chorus and our yarns we used to tell, and we'd talk of lands we come from and of chaps we used to know, for there always was behind us other days of long ago. Them early days was ended when the real road crossed the plain, but in dreams I often tramped beside the bullock team again. Still we pauses at the shanty just to have a drop of cheer. Still I feels a kind of pleasure when the camping ground is near. Still I smells the old tarpaulin me and Jimmy used to throw o'er the timber truck for shelter in the days of long ago. I have been a-drifting backwards with the changes of the land, and if I spokes to bullocks now they wouldn't understand. But when Mary wakes me sudden in the night I'll often say, "Come here, Spot, and stand up, Bally, blank and come here way." And she says that when I'm sleeping off my eloquence will flow in the bullock driving language of the days of long ago. Well, the pub will soon be closing, so I'll give the thing a rest. But if you should drop on Nowlet in the far and distant west, and if Jimmy uses W instead of R and V, and if he drops his H's, then you're sure to know it's he, and you won't forget to ask him if he still remembers Joe, as knowed him up the country in the days of long ago. Then it's yoke up the bullocks and tramp beside 'em slow, and saddle up your horses and a-riding we will go, to the bullock driving, cattle droving, nigger, digger, roaring, roving days of long ago. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Corny Bill by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Larry Wilson. His old clay pipe stuck in his mouth, his hat pushed from his brow, his dress best fitted for the South. I think I see him now. And when the city streets are still and sleep upon me comes, I often dream that me and Bill are humpin' of our drums. I mind the time when first I came a stranger to the land, and I was stumped and stick and lame when Bill took me in hand. Old Bill was what a chap would call a friend in poverty, and he was very kind to all, and very good to me. We'd camp beneath the lonely trees, and sit beside the blaze, a nursin' of our wearied knees, a smokin' of our clays. Or when we'd journeyed damp and far, and clouds were in the skies, we'd camp in some old shanty bar, and sit a-tellin' lies. Though time had writ upon his brow and rubbed away his curls, he always was, and may be now, a favorite with the girls. I've heard bush women scream and squall, I've seed them laugh until they could not do their work at all, because of Corny Bill. He was the jolliest old pup as ever you did see, and often at some bush kick-up he'd make old Bill M.C. He'd make them dance and sing all night, he'd make the music hum, but he would be gone at mornin' light, a-humpin' of his drum. Though joys of which the poet rhymes was not for Bill and me, I think we had some good old times out on the Wallaby. I took a wife and left off rum, and camped beneath a roof, but Bill preferred to hump his drum, a-paddin' on the hoof. The lazy, idle loafers, what a Tony House's camp, would call old Bill a drunken sot, a loafer, or a tramp. But if the dead should ever dance, as poets say they will, I think I'd rather take my chance along of Corny Bill. His long life's day is nearly o'er, its shades begin to fall, he soon must mount his bluey for the last long tramp of all. I trust that when in bush and town he's lived and learnt his fill, they'll let the golden sliprails down for poor old Corny Bill. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Cherry Tree Inn by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Tamburino. The rafters are open to sun, moon, and star. Thistles and nettles grow high in the bar. The chimneys are crumbling, the log fires are dead, and green mosses spring from the hearthstone instead. The voices are silent, the bustle and din, for the railroad hath ruined the Cherry Tree Inn. Save the glimmer of stars of the moon's pallid streams, and the sounds of the possums that camp on the beams, the barroom is dark and the stable is still, for the coach comes no more over Cherry Tree Hill. No riders push on through the darkness to win the rest and the comfort of Cherry Tree Inn. I drift from my theme, for my memory strays to the carrying, digging, and bush-ranging days, far back to the seasons that I love the best, when a stream of wild diggers rushed into the west. But the rushes grew feeble and sluggish and thin, till scarcely a swagman passed Cherry Tree Inn. Do you think, my old mate, if it's thinking you be, of the days when you tramped the goldfields with me? Do you think of the day of our 30-mile tramp, when never a fire could we light on the camp, and weary and footsore and drenched to the skin, we tramped through the darkness to Cherry Tree Inn? Then I had a sweetheart, and you had a wife, and Johnny was more to his mother than life. But we solemnly swore, ere that evening was done, that we'd never return till our fortunes were won. Next morning, to harvests of folly and sin, we tramped o'er the ranges from Cherry Tree Inn. The years have gone over with many a change, and there comes an old swagman from over the range, and faint 'neath the weight of his rain-sodden load, he suddenly thinks of the inn by the road. He tramps through the darkness, the shelter to win, and reaches the ruins of Cherry Tree Inn. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Up the Country by Henry Lawson, read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway, 12th of November 2016, Kent. I am back from up the country, very sorry that I went, seeking for the southern poet's land whereon to pitch my tent. I have lost a lot of idols which were broken on the track, burnt a lot of fancy verses, and I'm glad that I am back. Further out may be the pleasant scenes of which our poets boast, but I think the country's rather more inviting round the coast. Anyway, I'll stay at present at the boarding house in town, drinking beer and lemon squashes, taking baths and cooling down. Sunny plains, great Scott, those burning wastes of barren soil and sand, with their everlasting fences stretched out across the land, desolation where the crow is, desert where the eagle flies, paddocks where the loony bullock starts and stares with reddened eyes, where in clouds of dust enveloped roasted bullock drivers creep slowly past the sun-dried shepherd dragged behind his crawling sheep. Stunted peak of granite gleaming, glaring at a molten mass, turned from some infernal furnace on a plain devoid of grass. Miles and miles of thirsty gutters, strings of muddy water holes, in the place of shining rivers, walled by cliffs and forest bowls, barren ridges, gullies, ridges where the ever-maddening flies, fiercer than the plagues of Egypt, swarm about your blighted eyes. Bush, where there is no horizon, when the buried bushman sees nothing, nothing but the sameness of the ragged, stunted trees. Lonely hut with drought's eternal, suffocating atmosphere, where the God-forgotten hatter dreams of city life and beer. Treacherous tracks that trap the stranger, endless roads that gleam and glare, dark and evil-looking gullies hiding secrets here and there. Dull dumb flats and stony rises with the toiling bullocks bake, and the sinister gohanna and the lizard and the snake. Land of day and night, no morning freshness and no afternoon, when the great white sun is rising, bringeth summer heat in June. Dismal country for the exile, when the shades begin to fall, from the sad heart-breaking sunset to the new chum worst of all. Dreary land in rainy weather, with the endless clouds that drift o'er the bushman like a blanket that the Lord will never lift. Dismal land when it is raining, growl of floods, and oh, the whoosh of the rain and wind together on the dark bed of the bush. Ghastly fires in lonely humpies when the granite rocks are piled in the rain-swept wildernesses that are wildest of the wild. Land where gaunt and haggard women live alone and work like men, till the husbands gone a droving will return to them again. Homes of men, if home had ever such a God-forgotten place, where the wild selector's children fly before a stranger's face. Home of tragedy applauded by the dingo's dismal yell, heaven of a shanty keeper, fitting fiend for such a hell. And the wallaroos and wombats, and of course the curlew's call, and the lone sundowner tramping ever onward through it all. I am back from up the country where I went, seeking for the southern poet's land whereon to pitch my tent. I have shattered many idols out along the dusty track, burnt a lot of fancy verses, and I'm glad that I am back. I believe the southern poet's dream will not be realised till the plains are irrigated and the land is humanised. I intend to stay at present, as I said before, in town, drinking beer and lemon squashes, taking baths and cooling down. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. Knocked Up by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway. 31st of October 2016, Kent. I'm lying on a barren ground that's baked and cracked with drought, and dunno if my legs or back or heart is most wore out. I've got no spirits left to rise and smooth me aching brow. I'm too knocked up to light a fire and bile the billy now. Oh, it's a tramping, tramping, tramping in flies and dust and heat. Oh, it's a tramping, tramping, tramping through mud and slush and sleet. It's a tramp and tramp for tucker, one everlasting strife, and wearing out your boots and heart in the wasting of your life. They whine or lost in wasted lives in idleness and crime. I've wasted mine for 20 years and grafted all the time, and never drunk the stuff I earned nor gambled where I shore, but somehow when you're on the track your life seems wasted more. A long dry stretch of 30 miles I've tramped this broiling day, or for the off chance of a job 100 miles away. There's 20 hungry beggars wild for any job this year, and 50 might be at the shed while I am lying here. The sinews in my legs seem drawn red hot, and that's the truth. I seem to weigh a ton and ache like one tremendous tooth. I'm stung between my shoulder blades, my blessed back seems broke. I'm too knocked out to eat a bite, I'm too knocked up to smoke. The blessed rain is coming too, there's oceans in the sky, and I suppose I must get up and rig that blessed fly. The heat is bad, the water's bad, the flies a crimson curse. The grub is bad, mosquitoes damn, but my rheumatism's worse. I wonder why poor blokes like me will stick so fast to breath, though Shakespeare says it is the fear of something after death. But though eternity be cursed with God's almighty curse, whatever the same something is, I swear it can't be worse. For it's a tramping, tramping, tramping through hell across the plain, and it's a tramping, tramping, tramping through slush and mud and rain. A living worse than any dog without a home and wife, a wearing out a heart and soul in the wasting of your life. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Blue Mountains by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Larry Wilson. Above the ashes, straight and tall, through the ferns with moisture dripping, I climb beneath the sandstone wall, my feet on mosses slipping. Like ramparts round the valley's edge, the tinted cliffs are standing, with many a broken wall and ledge, and many a rocky landing. And round about their rugged feet, deep ferny dells are hidden in shadowed depths, whence dust and heat are banished and forbidden. The stream that crooning to itself comes down a tireless rover, flows calmly to the rocky shelf, and there leaps bravely over. Now pouring down, now lost in spray when mountain breezes sally, the water strikes the rock midway, and leaps into the valley. Now in the west the colors change, the blue with crimson blending. Behind the far dividing range the sun is fast descending. And mellow day comes o'er the place, and softens ragged edges. The rising moon's great placid face looks gravely o'er the ledges. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The City Bushman by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway. 19th of November 2016, Kent. It was pleasant up the country, City Bushman, where you went, for you sought the greener patches and you travelled like a gent, and you cursed the trams and buses and the turmoil and the push, though you know the squalid city needn't keep you from the bush. But we lately heard you singing of the plains where shade is not, and you mentioned it was dusty, always dry and always hot. True, the bush hath moods and changes, and the bushman hath them too, for he's not a poet's dummy, he's the man as same as you. But his back is growing rounder, slaving for the absentee, and his toiling wife is thinner than a country wife should be. For we noticed that the faces of the folks we chanced to meet should have made a greater contrast to the faces in the street. And in short, we think the bushman's being driven to the wall, and it's doubtful if his spirit will be loyal through it all. Though the bush has been romantic and it's nice to sing about, there's a lot of patriotism that the land can do without, sort of British workman nonsense that shall perish in the scorn of the drover who is driven and the shearer who is shorn, of the struggling western farmers who have little time for rest and are ruined on selections in the sheep-infested west. Droving songs are very pretty, but they merit little thanks from the people of a country in possession of the banks. And the rise and fall of seasons suits the rise and fall of rhyme, but we know that western seasons do not run on scheduled time, for the drought will go on drying while there's anything to dry. Then it rains until you'd fancy it would bleach the sunny sky. Then it pelters out of reason for the downpour day and night, nearly sweeps the population to the great Australian bight. It is up in northern Queensland that the seasons do their best, but it's doubtful if you ever saw a season in the west. There are years without an autumn or a winter or a spring. There are broiling Junes and summer when it rains like anything. In the bush my ears were open to the singing of the bird, but the carol of the magpie was a thing I never heard. Once the beggar roused my slumbers in a shanty, it is true, but I only heard him asking, "Who the blanking blank are you?" And the bellbird in the ranges, but his silver chime is harsh when it's heard beside the solo of the curlew in the marsh. Yes, I heard the shearers singing William Riley out of tune, saw 'em fighting round a shanty on a Sunday afternoon, but the bushman isn't always tramping brambies on the night, nor is he forever riding when the morn is fresh and bright, and he isn't always singing in the humpies on the run, and the campfire's cheery blazes are a trifle overdone. We have grumbled with the bushman round the fire on rainy days, when the smoke would blind a bullock and there wasn't any blaze, save the blazes of our language, for we cursed the fire in turn, till the atmosphere was heated and the wood began to burn. Then we had to wring our blueys which were rotting in the swags, and we saw the sugar leaking through the bottoms of the bags, and we couldn't raise a chorus for the toothache and the cramp, while we spent the hours of darkness draining puddles round the camp. Would you like to change with Clancy, go a droving, tell us true, for we rather think that Clancy would be glad to change with you, and be something in the city, but 'twould give your muse a shock, to be losing time and money through the foot rot in the flock, and you wouldn't mind the beauties underneath the starry dome, if you had a wife and children and a lot of bills at home. Did you ever guard the cattle when the night was inky black, and it rained and icy water trickled gently down your back, till your saddle-weary backbone fell an aching to the roots, and you almost felt the croaking of the bullfrog in your boots? Sit and shiver in the saddle, curse the restless stock and cough, till a squatter's irate dummy cantered up to warn you off? Did you fight the drought and pleuro when the seasons were asleep, felling she-oaks all the morning for a flock of starving sheep, drinking mud instead of water, climbing trees and lopping boughs for the broken-hearted bullocks and the dry and dusty cows? Do you think the bush was better in the good old droving days, when the squatter ruled supremely as the king of western ways, when you got a slip of paper for the little you could earn, but were forced to take provisions from the station in return, when you couldn't keep a kitchen at your humpy on the run, for the squatter wouldn't let you and your work was never done, when you had to leave the missus in a lonely hut forlorn, while you rose up Willy Riley in the days ere you were born? Ah, we read about the drovers and the shearers and the like, till we wonder why such happy and romantic fellows strike. Don't you fancy that the poets ought to give the bush a rest, ere they raise a just rebellion in the overwritten West, when the simple-minded bushman gets a meal and bed and run, just by riding round reporting phantom flocks that never come, where the scalper, never troubled by the war-whoop of the push, has a quiet little billet breeding rabbits in the bush, where the idle shanty keeper never fails to make a draw, and the dummy gets his tucker through provisions in the law, where the labour agitator, where the shearers rise in might, makes his money sacrificing all the substance for the right, where the squatter makes his fortune and the seasons rise and fall, and the poor and honest bushman has to suffer for it all, where the drovers and the shearers and the bushmen and the rest never reach the El Dorado of the poets of the West. And you think the bush is purer and that life is better there, but it doesn't seem to pay you like the squalid street and square. Pray inform us, city bushman, where you read in prose or verse of the awful city urchin who would greet you with a curse. There are golden hearts in gutters, though their owners lap the fat, and will back the teamster's offspring to outswear a city brat. Do you think we're never jolly where the trams and buses rage? Did you hear the gods in chorus when Rhetorical held the stage? Did you catch a ring of sorrow in this city urchin's voice when he yelled for Billy Elton when he thumped the floor for Royce? Do the bushmen down on pleasure miss the everlasting stars when they drink and flirt and so on in the glow of private bars? You've a down on trams and buses or the roar of them, you said, and the filthy dirty attic where you never toiled for bread, and about that self-same attic, Lord, wherever have you been? For the struggling needlewoman mostly keeps her attic clean, but you'll find it very jolly with the cuff and collar push, and the city seems to suit you while you rave about the bush. You'll admit that up the country, more especially in drought, isn't quite the El Dorado that the poets rave about, yet at times we long to gallop where the reckless bushman rides, in the wake of startled brumbies that are flying for their hides, long to feel the saddle tremble once again between our knees, and to hear the stockwhips rattle just like rifles in the trees, long to feel the bridle leather tugging strongly in the hand, and to feel once more a little like a native of the land. And the ring of bitter feeling in the jingling of our rhymes isn't suited to the country nor the spirit of the times. Let us go together droving and returning if we live, try to understand each other while we reckon up the div. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Eurundery by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Mark Smith. Eurundery. There are scenes in the distance where beauty is not, on the desolate flats where gaunt apple trees rot, where the brooding old ridge rises up to the breeze from its dark lonely gullies of stringy bark trees. There are voice-haunted gaps, ever sullen and strange, but Eurundery lies like a gem in the range. Still I see in my fancy the dark green and blue of the box-covered hills where the five corners grew, and the rugged old she-oaks that sighed in the bend o'er the lily-decked pools where the dark ridges end, and the scrub-covered spurs running down from the peak to the deep grassy banks of Eurundery Creek. On the knolls where the vineyards and fruit gardens are, there's a beauty that even the drought cannot mar. For I noticed it oft in the days that are lost, as I trod on the siding where lingered the frost, when the shadows of night from the gullies were gone and the hills in the background were flushed by the dawn. I was there in late years, but there's many a change where the Cootagong River flows down through the range, For the curse of the town with the railroad had come, and the goldfields were dead, and the girl and the chum and the old home were gone, yet the oaks seemed to speak of the hazy old days on Eurunderee Creek. And I stood by that creek ere the sunset grew cold, when the leaves of the she-oaks are traced on the gold, and I thought of old things, and I thought of old folks, till I sighed in my heart to the sigh of the oaks, for the years waste away like the waters that leak through the pebbles and sand of Eurunderee Creek. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. Mount Buckaroo by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Mark Smith. Mount Buckaroo. Only one old post is standing, solid yet, but only one, where the milking and the branding and the slaughtering were done. Later years have brought dejection, care, and sorrow, but we knew happy days on that selection, underneath old Buckaroo. Then the light of day commencing found us at the gully's head, splitting timber for the fencing, stripping bark to roof the shed. Hands and hearts the labor strengthened, weariness we never knew, even when the shadows lengthened round the base of Buckaroo. There for days below the paddock, how the wilderness would yield to the spade and pick and mattock, while we toiled to win the field. Bronze hands we used to sully till they were of darkest hue, burning off down in the gully at the back of Buckaroo. When we came, the baby brother left in haste his broken toys, shouted to the busy mother, "Here is Dada and the boys!" Strange it seems that she was able, for the work that she would do, how she'd bustle round the table in the hut 'neath Buckaroo. When the cows were safely yarded and the calves were in the pen, all the cares of day discarded, close we round the hut fire then. Rang the roof with boyish laughter while the flames o'ertopped the flue. Happy days remembered after, far away from Buckaroo. But the years were full of changes, and a sorrow found us there, for our home amid the ranges was not safe from searching care. On he came, a silent creeper, and another mountain threw o'er our lives a shadow deeper than the shade of Buckaroo. All the farm is disappearing, for the home is vanished now. Mountain scrub has choked the clearing, hid the furrows of the plough. Nearer still the scrub is creeping where the little garden grew, and the old folks now are sleeping at the foot of Buckaroo. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Fire at Ross's Farm by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Tamburino. The squatter saw his pastures wide decrease as one by one the farmers moving to the west selected on his run. Selectors took the water up and all the black soil round. The best grassland the squatter had was spoiled by Ross's ground. Now many schemes to shift old Ross had racked the squatter's brains, but Sandy had the stubborn blood of Scotland in his veins. He held the land and fenced it in, he cleared and ploughed the soil, and year by year a richer crop repaid him for his toil. Between the homes for many years the devil left his tracks. The squatter pounded Ross's stock, and Sandy pounded Black's. A well upon the lower run was filled with earth and logs, and Black laid baits around the farm to poison Ross's dogs. It was indeed a deadly feud of class and creed and race, but yet there was a Romeo and a Juliet in the case, and more than once across the flats beneath the Southern Cross, young Robert Black was seen to ride with pretty Jenny Ross. One Christmas time, when months of drought had parched the western creeks, the brush fires started in the north and traveled south for weeks. At night, along the riverside, the scene was grand and strange. The hill fires looked like lighted streets of cities in the range. The cattle tracks between the trees were like long, dusty aisles, and on a sudden breeze the fire would sweep along for miles. Like sounds of distant musketry, it crackled through the brakes, and o'er the flat of silver grass it hissed like angry snakes. It leapt across the flowing streams and raced o'er pastures broad. It climbed the trees and lit the boughs, and through the shrubs it roared. The bees fell stifled in the smoke or perished in their hives, and with the stock the kangaroos went flying for their lives. The sun had set on Christmas Eve when, through the shrublands wide, young Robert Black came riding home, as only natives ride. He galloped to the homestead door and gave the first alarm. "The fire is past the granite spur and close to Ross's farm. Now, father, send the men at once, they won't be wanted here. Poor Ross's wheat is all he has to pull him through the year." "Then let it burn," the squatter said. "I'd like to see it done. I'd bless the fire if it would clear selectors from the run." "Go if you will," the squatter said. "You shall not take the men. Go out and join your precious friends, and don't come here again." "I won't come back," young Robert cried, and reckless in his ire, he sharply turned the horse's head and galloped toward the fire. And there for 3 long weary hours, half blind with smoke and heat, old Ross and Robert fought the flames that neared the ripened wheat. The farmer's hand was nerved by fears of danger and of loss, and Robert fought the stubborn foe for the love of Jenny Ross. But serpent-like the curves and lines slipped past them and between, until they reached the boundary where the old coach road had been. "The track is now our only hope. There we must stand," cried Ross, "for naught on earth can stop the fire if once it gets across." Then came a cruel gust of wind, and with a fiendish rush the flames leapt o'er the narrow path and lit the fence of brush. "The crop must burn," the farmer cried. "We cannot save it now." And down upon the blackened ground he dashed the ragged bough. But wildly, in a rush of hope, his heart began to beat, for o'er the crackling fire he heard the sound of horses' feet. "Here's help at last," young Robert cried, and even as he spoke, the squatter with a dozen men came racing through the smoke. Down on the ground the stockmen jumped and bared each brawny arm. They tore green branches from the trees and fought for Ross's farm. And when before the gallant band the beaten flames gave way, 2 grimy hands in friendship joined, and it was Christmas Day. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Teams by Henry Lawson, read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway, on the 12th of December 2016, Kent. A cloud of dust on the long white road, and the teams go creeping on, inch by inch with the weary load, and by the power of the green-hide goad, the distant goal is won. With eyes half shut to the blinding dust, and necks to the yokes bent low, the beasts are pulling as bullocks must, and the shining tyres might almost rust while the spokes are turning slow. With face half hid neath a broad-brimmed hat that shades from the heat's white waves, and shouldered whip with its green-hide plait, the driver plods with a gait like that of his weary, patient slaves. He wipes his brow, for the day is hot, and spits to the left with spite. He shouts at Bally, and flicks at Scott, and raises dust from the back of Spot, and spits to the dusty right. He'll sometimes pause as a thing of form, in front of a settler's door, and ask for a drink, and remark it's warm, or say there's signs of a thunderstorm, but he seldom utters more. But the rains are heavy on roads like these, and fronting his lonely home, for weeks together the settler sees the teams bogged down to the axle trees, or ploughing the sodden loam. And then when the roads are at their worst, the bushman's children hear the cruel blows of the whips reversed, while bullocks pull as their hearts would burst, and bellow with pain and fear. And thus with little of joy or rest are the long, long journeys done. And thus 'tis a cruel war at the best, is distance fought in the mighty west, and the lonely battles won. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. Cameron's Heart by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway on the 30th of December 2016, Kent. The Duggan were just in their glory when Alistair Cameron came, with recommendations, he told me, from friends and a parson at hame. He read me his recommendations. He called them a part of his plant. The first one was signed by an elder, the other by Cameron's aunt. The minister called him ungodly, astray frae the fall of the Lord, and his aunt set him down as a spendthrift, a rebel at home and abroad. He got drunk now and then, and he gambled. Such heroes are often the same. That's all they could say in connection with Alistair Cameron's name. He was straight and he stuck to his country, and spoke with respect of his kirk. He did his full share of the cooking, and more than his share of the work. And many a poor devil then, when his strength and his money were spent, was sure of a lecture and tucker and a shakedown in Cameron's tent. He shunned all the girls in the camp, and they said he was proof to the dart, that nothing but whisky and gaming had ever a place in his heart, and carried a packet about him, well hid, but I saw it at last. And well, 'tis a very old story, the story of Cameron's past. A ring and a sprig of white heather, a letter or two and a curl, a bit of a worn silver chain, and the portrait of Cameron's girl. It chanced in the first of the 60s that Hallie and I and McKean were sinking a shaft on Mundoorin, near Fosbury's puddle machine. The bucket we used was a big one, and rather a weight when 'twas full, though Alistair wound it up easy, for he had the strength of a bull. He hinted at heart disease often, but setting his fancy apart, I always believed there was nothing the matter with Cameron's heart. One day I was working below. I was filling the bucket with clay, when Alistair cried, "Pack it on, mon, we ought to be bottom today." He wound, and the bucket rose steady and swift to the surface until it reached the first log on the top, where it suddenly stopped and hung still. I knew what was up in a moment, when Cameron shouted to me, "Climb up for your life by the footholes, I'll stick to the honel or dee." And those were the last words he uttered. He groaned, for I heard him quite plain. There's nothing so awful as that when it's wrung from a workman in pain. The strength of despair was upon me. I started and scarcely drew breath, but climbed to the top for my life in the fear of a terrible death. And there, with his waist on the handle, I saw the dead form of my mate, and over the shaft hung the bucket, suspended by Cameron's weight. I wonder did Alistair think of the scenes in the distance so dim, when death at the windlass that morning took cruel advantage of him. He knew if the bucket rushed down, it would murder or cripple his mate. His hand on the iron was closed, with a grip that was stronger than fate. He thought of my danger, not his, when he felt in his bosom the smart, and stuck to the handle in spite of the finger of death on his heart. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Shame of Going Back by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway. 31st of October 2016, Kent. When you've come to make a fortune and you haven't made your sort, and the reason of your failure isn't anybody's fault, when you haven't got a billet and the times are very slack. There is nothing that can spur you like the shame of going back. Crawling home with empty pockets, going back hard up. Oh, it's then you learn the meaning of humiliation's cup. When the place and you are strangers, and you struggle all alone, and you have a mighty longing for a town where you are known. When your clothes are very shabby, and the future's very black, there is nothing that can hurt you like the shame of going back. When you fought the battle bravely, and are beaten to the wall, 'tis the sneers of men, not conscience, that make cowards of us all. And the while you are returning, oh, your brain is on the rack, and your heart is in the shadow of the shame of going back. When a beaten man's discovered with a bullet in his brain, they post-mortem him and try him, and they say he was insane. But it very often happens that he'd lately got the sack, and his onward move was owing to the shame of going back. Ah, my friend, you call it nonsense, and your upper lip is curled. I can see that you have never worked your passage through the world. But when fortune rounds upon you, and the rain is on the track, you will learn the bitter meaning of the shame of going back. Going home with empty pockets, going home hard up. Oh, you taste the bitter poison in humiliation's cup. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Since Then by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway on the 30th of December 2016, Kent. I met Jack Ellis in town today. Jack Ellis, my old mate Jack. 10 years ago from the Castle Ray, we carried our swags together away to the never again outback. But times have altered since those old days, and the times have changed the men. Ah well, there's little to blame or praise. Jack Ellis and I have tramped long ways on different tracks since then. His hat was battered, his coat was green, the toes of his boots were through, but the pride was his, it was I felt mean. I wished that my collar was not so clean, nor the clothes I wore so new. He saw me first and he knew 'twas I, the holiday swell he met. Why have we no faith in each other, ah why? He made as though he would pass me by, for he thought I might forget. He ought to have known me better than that, by the tracks we tramped far out. The sweltering scrub and the blazing flat, when the heat came down through each old felt hat, in the hell-born western drought. The checks we made and the shanty sprees, the camps in the great blind scrub, the long wet tramps when the plains were seas, and the oracles worked in days like these, for rum and tobacco and grub. Could I forget how we struck the same old tale in the nearer west, when the first great test of our friendship came? But well, there's little to praise or blame if our mateship stood the test. Heads he laughed, but his face was stern, tails and a friendly oath. We loved her fair, we had much to learn, and each was stabbed to the heart in turn by the girl who loved us both. Or the last day'd lost on the Lignum plain, when I staggered half blind, half dead, with a burning throat and a tortured brain, and the tank when we came to the track again was 17 miles ahead. Then life seemed finished, then death began, as down in the dust I sank. But he stuck to his mate as a bushman can, till I heard him saying, "Bear up, old man," in the shade by the mulga tank. He took my hand in a distant way, I thought how we parted last, and we seemed like men who have naught to say, and who meet good day, and who part good day, who never have shared the past. I asked him in for a drink with me, Jack Ellis, my old mate Jack. But his manner no longer was careless and free. He followed, but not with the grin that he wore always in days out back. I tried to live in the past once more, or the present and past combine. But the days between I could not ignore. I couldn't help notice the clothes he wore, and he couldn't but notice mine. He placed his glass on the polished bar, and he wouldn't fill up again, for he is prouder than most men are. Jack Ellis and I have tramped too far on different tracks since then. He said that he had a mate to meet, and "I'll see you again," said he. Then he hurried away through the crowded street, and the rattle of buses and scrape of feet seemed suddenly loud to me. And I almost wished that the time were come when less will be left to fate, when boys will start on the track from home, with equal chances and no old chum have more or less than his mate. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. Peter Anderson and Co. by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway, 26th of November 2016, Kent. He had offices in Sydney not so many years ago, and his shingle bore the legend Peter Anderson and Co. But his real name was Careless, as the fellows understood, and his relative decided that he wasn't any good. 'Twas their gentle tongues that blasted any character he had. He was fond of beer and leisure, and the Co. was just as bad. It was limited in number to a unit, was the Co. 'Twas a bosom chum of Peter, and his Christian name was Joe. 'Tis a class of men belonging to these soul-forsaken years, third-rate canvassers, collectors, journalists and auctioneers. They are never very shabby, they are never very spruce, going cheerfully and carelessly and smoothly to the deuce. Some are wanderers by profession, turning up and gone as soon, travelling second class or steerage, when it's cheap they go saloon. Free from ists and isms, troubled little by belief or doubt, lazy, purposeless and useless, knocking round and hanging out. They will take what they can get, and they will give what they can give. God alone knows how they manage, God alone knows how they live. They are nearly always hard up, but are cheerful all the while, men whose energy and trousers wear out sooner than their smile. They no doubt like us are haunted by the boresome if or might, but their ghosts are ghosts of daylight, they are men who live at night. Peter met you with the comic smile of one who knows you well, and is mighty glad to see you, and has got a joke to tell. He could laugh when all was gloomy, he could grin when all was blue, sing a comic song and act it, and appreciate it too. Only cynical in cases where his own self was the jest, and the humour of his good yarns made atonement for the rest. Seldom serious, doing business just as 'twere a friendly game, cards or billiards, nothing graver, and the Co. was much the same. They tried everything and nothing twixt the shovel and the press, and were more or less successful in their ventures, mostly less. Once they ran a country paper till the plant was seized for debt, and the local sinners chuckle over dingy copies yet. They'd been through it all and knew it in the land of bills and gyms. Using Peter's own expression, they had been in various swims. Now and then they'd take an office, as they called it, make a dash into business life as agents, something not requiring cash. You can always furnish cheaply, when your cash or credit fails, with a packing case, a hammer, and a pound of 2-inch nails, and maybe a drop of varnish, and sienna too for tints, and a scrap or two of oilcloth, and a yard or two of chintz. They would pull themselves together, pay a week's rent in advance, but it never lasted longer than a month by any chance. The office was their haven, for they lived there when hard up, a daily for a tablecloth, a jam tin for a cup, and if the landlord's bailiff happened round in times like these, and seized the office fittings, well, there wasn't much to seize. They would leave him in possession, but at other times they shot the moon and took an office where the landlord knew them not, and when morning brought the bailiff there'd be nothing to be seen, save a piece of bevelled cedar where the tenant's plate had been. There would be no sign of Peter, there would be no sign of Joe, till another portal boasted Peter Anderson and Co. And when times were locomotive, billiard rooms and private bars, spicy parties at the cafe, long cab drives beneath the stars, private picnics down the harbour, shady campings out, you know. No one would have dreamed 'twas Peter, no one would have thought 'twas Joe. Free and easies in their diggings when the funds began to fail, bosom chums, cigars, tobacco, and a case of English ale, gloriously drunk and happy till they heard the roosters crow, and the landlady and neighbours made complaints about the Co. But that life, it might be likened to a reckless drinking song, for it can't go on forever, and it never lasted long. Debt collecting ruined Peter. People talked him round too oft, for his heart was soft as butter, and the Co's was just as soft. He would cheer the haggard missus, and he'd tell her not to fret, and he'd ask the worried debtor round with him to have a wet. He would ask him round the corner, and it seemed to him and her, after each of Peter's visits, things were brighter than they were. But of course it wasn't business, only Peter's careless way. And perhaps it pays in heaven, but on earth it doesn't pay. They got harder up than ever, and to make it worse the Co. went more often round the corner than was good for him to go. "I might live," he said to Peter, "but I haven't got the nerve. I am going, Peter, going. Going, no reserve. Eat and drink and love, they tell us, for tomorrow we may die. Buy experience, and we bought it. We're experienced, you and I." Then with a weary movement of his hand across his brow, "The death of such philosophy's the death I'm dying now. Pull yourself together, Peter. 'Tis the dying wish of Joe, that the business world shall honour Peter Anderson and Co. When you feel your life is sinking in a dull and useless course, and begin to find in drinking keener pleasure and remorse, when you feel the love of leisure on your careless heart take holt, break away from friends and pleasure, though it give your heart a jolt. Shun the poison breath of cities, billiard rooms and private bars. Go where you can breathe God's air and see the grandeur of the stars. Find again and follow up the old ambitions that you had. See if you can raise a drink, old man. I'm feeling mighty bad. Hot and sweetened, nip of butter, squeeze a lemon, Pete," he sighed. And while Peter went to fetch it, Joseph went to sleep and died. With a smile, anticipation maybe, of the piece to come, or a joke to try on Peter, or perhaps it was the rum. Peter staggered, gripped the table, swerved as some old drunkard swerves. At a gulp he drank the toddy, just to brace his shattered nerves. It was awful, if you like, but then he hadn't time to think. All is nothing, nothing matters. Fill your glasses, dead man's drink. Yet to show his heart was not of human decency bereft, Peter paid the undertaker. He got drunk on what was left. Then he shed some tears, half maudlin, on the grave where lay the Co. And he drifted to a township where the city failures go, where, though haunted by the man he was, the wreck he yet might be, or the man he might have been, or by each spectre of the three, and the dying words of Joseph ringing through his own despair, Peter pulled himself together and he started business there. But his life was very lonely, and his heart was very sad, and no help to reformation was the company he had. Men who might have been, who had been, but who were not in the swim. 'Twas a town of wrecks and failures. They appreciated him. They would ask him who the Co was, that queer company he kept, and he'd always answer vaguely. He would say his partner slept, that he had a sleeping partner, jesting while his spirit broke, and they grinned above their glasses, for they took it as a joke. He would shout while he had money, he would joke while he had breath. No one seemed to care or notice how he drank himself to death, till at last there came a morning when his smile was seen no more. He was gone from out the office, and his shingle from the door, and a boundary rider jogging out across the neighbouring run was attracted by a something that was blazing in the sun, and he found that it was Peter, lying peacefully at rest, with a bottle close beside him and the shingle on his breast. Well, they analysed the liquor, and it would appear that he qualified his drink with something good for setting spirits free. Though 'twas plainly self-destruction, 'twas his own affair, they said, and the jury viewed him sadly, and they found that he was dead. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
When the Children Come Home by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Carol Bedell. On a lonely selection far out in the west, an old woman works all day without rest, and she croons as she toils 'neath the sky's glassy dome, "Sure, I'll keep the old place till the childer come home." She mends all the fences, she grubs and she plows, she drives the old horse and she milks all the cows, and she sings to herself as she thatches the stack, "Sure, I'll keep the old place till the childer come back." It is 5 weary years since her husband died, and off as he lay on his deathbed he sighed, "Sure, one man can bring up 10 children, he can, and it's strange that 10 sons cannot keep one old man." Whenever the scowling old sundowners come and cunningly ask if the master's at home, "Be off," she replies, "with your blarney and cant, or I'll call my son Andy, he's workin' beyont." "Get out," she replies, though she trembles with fear, for she lives all alone and no neighbors are near. But she says to herself when she's like to despond, that the boys are at work in the paddock beyond. None of her children need follow the plough, and some have grown rich in the city ere now. Yet she says, they might come when the shearing is done, and I'll keep the old place if it's only for one. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Dan the Wreck by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway on the 1st of December 2016, Kent. Tall and stout and solid looking, yet a wreck. None would think death's fingers hooking him from deck. 'Cause of half the fun that started hard-case Dan isn't like a broken-hearted ruined man. Walking coat from tail to throat is frayed and greened, like a man whose other coat is being cleaned. Gone forever round the edging, past repair. Waistcoat pockets frayed with dredging after Sprat's no longer there. Wearing summer boots in June or slippers worn and old, like a man whose other shoon are getting sold. Pants, they're far from being recent, but perhaps I'd better not, says they are the only decent pair he's got. And his hat, I am afraid, is troubling him, past all lifting to the ladies by the brim. But although he'd hardly strike a girl, would Dan, yet he wears his wreckage like a gentleman. Once, no matter how the rest dressed up or down, once, they say, he was the best dressed man in town. Must have been before I knew him, now you'd scarcely care to meet, and be noticed talking to him in the street. Drink the cause and dissipation, that is clear. Maybe friend or kind relation cause a beer. And the talking fool who never reads or thinks says from hearsay, yes, he's clever, but you know, he drinks. Been an actor and a writer, doesn't whine. Reckon now the best reciter in his line. Takes the stage at times and fills it, Princess May or Waterloo. Raise a sneer, his first line kills it, brings them too. Where he lives or how or wherefore, no one knows. Lost his real friends and therefore lost his foes. Had no doubt his own romances, met his fate. Tortured doubtless by the chances and the luck that comes too late. Now and then his boots are polished, collar clean, and the worst grease stains abolished by ammonia or benzene. Hints of some attempt to shove him from the taps, or of someone left to love him, sister perhaps. After all, he is a grafter, earns his cheer, keeps the room in roars of laughter when he gets outside a beer. Yarns that would fall flat from others he can tell. How he spent his stuff, my brothers, you know well. Manner puts a man in mind of old club balls and evening dress, ugly with a handsome kind of ugliness. One of those we say of often, while hearts swell, standing sadly by the coffin, he looks well. We may be, so goes a rumour, bad as Dan, but we may not have the humour of the man, nor the sight well deem it blindness, as the general public do, and the love of human kindness, or the grit to see it through. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
A Prouder Man Than You by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway. 31st of October 2016, Kent. If you fancy that your people came of better stock than mine, if you hint of higher breeding by a word or by a sign, if you're proud because of fortune or the clever things you do, then I'll play no second fiddle, I'm a prouder man than you. If you think that your profession has more gentility and that you are condescending to be seen along with me, if you notice that I'm shabby while your clothes are spruce and new, you've only got to hint it, I'm a prouder man than you. If you have a swell companion when you see me in the street and you think that I'm too common for your Tony friend to meet, so that I, in passing closely, fail to come within your view, then be blind to me forever, I'm a prouder man than you. If your character be blameless, if your outward pass be clean, but 'tis known my antecedents are not what they should have been, do not risk contamination, save your name whate'er you do. Birds of feather fly together, I'm a prouder man than you. Keep your patronage for others, Golden Station cannot hide. Friendship that can laugh at fortune, friendship that can conquer pride. Offer this as to an equal, let me see that you are true, and my wall of pride is shattered. I'm not so proud as you. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Song and the Sigh by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway on 12th of December 2016, Kent. The creek went down with a broken song, 'neath the she-oaks high. The waters carried the song along, and the oaks a sigh. The song and the sigh went winding by, went winding down, circling the foot of the mountain high, and the hillside brown. They were hushed in the swamp of the dead man's crime, where the curlews cried, but they reached the river the self-same time, and there they died. And the creek of life goes winding on, wandering by, and bears forever its course upon a song and a sigh. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Cambaroora Star by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway. 12th of November 2016, Kent. So you're writing for a paper? Well, it's nothing very new to be writing yards of drivel for a tidy little screw. You are young and educated, and a clever chap you are, but you'll never run a paper like the Cambaroora Star. Though in point of education I am nothing but a dunce, I myself, you mayn't believe it, helped to run a paper once with a chap on Cambaroora by the name of Charlie Brown, and I'll tell you all about it if you take the story down. On a golden day in summer, when the sun rays were aslant, Brown arrived in Cambaroora with a little printing plant, and his worldly goods and chattels rather damaged on the way, and a weary-looking woman who was following the dray. He had bought an empty humpy, and instead of getting tight, while the diggers heard him working like a lunatic all night, and next day a sign of canvas, written characters of tar, claimed the humpy as the office of the Cambaroora Star. Well, I cannot read, that's honest, but I had a digger friend who would read the paper to me from the title to the end, and the Star contained a leader running thieves and spielers down, with a slap against claim jumping and a poem made by Brown. Once I showed it to a critic, and he said 'twas very fine, though he wasn't long in finding glaring faults in every line. But it was a song of freedom, all the clever critics said. Couldn't stop that song from ringing, ringing, ringing in my head. So I went where Brown was working in his little hut hard by. My old mate has been a reading of your writings, Brown, said I. I have studied on your leader, I agree with what you say. You have struck the bedrock certain, and there ain't no get away. Your paper's just the thumper for a young and growing land, and your principles is honest, Brown, I want to shake your hand. And if there's any lumping in connection with the Star, well, I'll find the time to do it, and I'll help you, there you are. Brown was every inch a digger, bronzed and bearded in the south, but there seemed a kind of weakness round the corners of his mouth. When he took the hand I gave him, and he gripped it like a vice, while he tried his best to thank me, and he stuttered once or twice. But there wasn't need for talking, with the same old loves and hates, and we understood each other, Charlie Brown and I were mates. So we worked a little paddock on a place they called the Bar, and we sank a shaft together, and at night we worked the Star. Charlie thought and did his writing when his work was done at night, and the missus used to set it near as quick as he could write. Well, I didn't shirk my promise, and I helped the thing, I guess, for at night I worked the lever of the crazy printing press. Brown himself would do the feeding, and the missus used to fly. She is flying with the angels, if there's justice up on high, for she died on Cambaroora when the Star began to go, and was buried like the diggers buried diggers long ago. Lord, that press it was a jumper, we could seldom get it right, and were lucky if we averaged 100 in the night. Many nights we'd sit together in the windy hut and fold, and I helped the thing a little when I struck a patch of gold. And we battled for the diggers as the papers seldom do, though when the diggers erred, while we'd touch the diggers too. Yet the paper took the fancy of that roaring mining town, and the diggers sent a nugget with their sympathy to Brown. Oft I sat and smoked beside him in the listening hours of night, when the shadows from the corners seemed to gather round the light, when his weary aching fingers, closing stiffly round the pen, wrote defiant truth in language that could touch the hearts of men, wrote until his eyelids shuddered, wrote until the east was grey, wrote the stern and awful lessons that were taught him in this day. And they knew that he was honest, and they read his smallest par, for I think the digger's Bible was the Cambaroora Star. Diggers then had little mercy for the loafer and the scamp. If there wasn't law and order, there was justice in the camp, and the mainly independence that is found where diggers are had a sentinel to guard it in the Cambaroora Star. There was strife about the Chinamen who came in days of old, like a swarm of thieves and loafers when the diggers found the gold, like the sneaking fortune hunters who are always found behind, and who only shepherd diggers till they track them to the find. Charlie wrote a slinging leader calling on his digger mates, and he said, we think that Chinkies are as bad as syndicates. What's the good of holding meetings when you only talk and swear? Get a move upon the Chinkies when you've got an hour to spare. It was 9 o'clock next morning when the chows began to swarm, but they weren't so long in going, for the diggers' blood was warm. Then the diggers held a meeting, and they shouted, hip hurrah, give 3 ringing cheers, my hearties, for the Cambaroora Star. But the Cambaroora repeated, and the digger's sun went down, and another sort of people came and settled in the town. The reefing was conducted by a syndicate or two, and they changed the name to Queensville, for their blood was very blue. They wanted Brown to help them put their feathers in their nests, but his leaders went like thunder for their vested interests. And he fought for right and justice, and he raved about the dawn of the reign of man and reason, till his ads were all withdrawn. He was offered shares for nothing in the richest of the mines, and he could have made a fortune had he run on other lines. They abused him for his leaders, and they parodied his rhymes, and they told him that his paper was a mile behind the times. Let the times alone, said Charlie, that's all right, you needn't fret, for I started long before them, and they haven't caught me yet. But, says he to me, they're coming, and they're not so very far, though I left the times behind me, they are following the Star. Let them do their worst, said Charlie, but they'll never drop the reins, while a single scrap of paper or an ounce of ink remains. I've another truth to tell them, though they tread me in the dirt, and I'll print another issue if I print it on my shirt. So we fought the battle bravely, and we did our very best, just to make the final issue quite as lively as the rest. And the swells in Cambaroora talked of feathers and of tar, when they read the final issue of the Cambaroora Star. Gold is stronger than the tongue is, gold is stronger than the pen. They'd have squirmed in Cambaroora had I found a nugget then, but in vain we scraped together every penny we could get, for they fixed us with their boycott and the plan was seized for debt. 'Twas a storekeeper who did it, and he sealed the paper's doom, though we gave him ads for nothing when the Star began to boom. 'Twas a paltry bill for tucker, and the crawling, sneaking clown sowed the debt for twice its value to the men who hated Brown. I was digging up the river, and I swam the flooded bend, with a little cash and comfort for my literary friend. Brown was sitting sad and lonely, with his head bowed in despair, while a single tallow candle threw a flicker in his hair. And the gusty wind that whistled through the crannies of the door stirred the scattered files of paper that were lying on the floor. Charlie took my hand in silence, and by he said, Tom, old mate, we did our damnedest, but the brave old Star is dead. Then he stood up on a sudden, with a face as pale as death, and he gripped my hand a moment while he seemed to fight for breath. Tom, old friend, he said, I'm going, and I'm ready to start, for I know that there is something crooked with my heart. Tom, my first child, died. I loved him even better than the pen. Tom, and while the star was dying, why I felt like I did then. Listen, like the distant thunder of the rollers on the bar. Listen, Tom, I hear the diggers shouting bully for the star. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
After All by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Esraa. The brooding ghosts of Australian night have gone from the bush and town. My spirit revives in the morning breeze, though it died when the sun went down. The river is high, and the stream is strong, and the grass is green and tall. And I fain would think that this world of ours is a good world after all. The light of passion in dreamy eyes, and a page of truth well read, the glorious thrill in a heart grown cold of the spirit I thought was dead. A song that goes to a comrade's heart, and a tear of pride let fall. And my soul is strong, and the world to me is a grand world after all. Let our enemies go by their old dull tracks, and theirs be the fault or shame. The man is bitter against the world who has only himself to blame. Let the darkest side of the past be dark, and only the good recall. For I must believe that the world, my dear, is a kind world after all. It well may be that I saw too plain, and it may be I was blind, but I'll keep my face to the dawning light, though the devil might stand behind. Though the devil might stand behind my back, I will not see his shadow fall, but read the signs in the morning stars of a good world after all. Rest, for your eyes are weary, girl, you have driven the worst away. The ghost of the man I might have been is gone from my heart today. We will live for life and the best it brings, till our twilight shadows fall. My heart grows brave, and the world, my girl, is a good world after all. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Marshall's Mate by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Michael Conway, 26th of November 2016, Kent. You almost heard the surface bake and saw the gum leaves turn. You could have watched the grass scorch brown had there been grass to burn. In such a drought the strongest heart might well grow faint and weak. 'Twould frighten Satan to his home, not far from Dingo Creek. The tanks went dry on 90 Mile, as tanks go dry out back. The halfway spring had failed at last when Marshall missed the track. Beneath a dead tree on the plain we saw a pack horse reel, too blind to see there was no shade, and too done up to feel. And charcoaled on the canvas bag, 'twas written pretty clear. We read the message Marshall wrote. It said, I'm taken queer. I'm somewhere off of dead men's track, half blind and nearly dead. Find Crowbar, get him sobered up, and follow back, it said. Let Mitchell go to Bandicoot, you'll find him there, said Mac. I'll start the chaps from Starving Steers and take the dry holes back. We tramped till dark and tried to track the pack horse on the sands, and just at daylight Crowbar came with Milroy's station hands. His cheeks were drawn, his face was white, but he was sober then. In times of trouble, fire and flood, 'twas Crowbar led the men. Spread out as widely as you can each side the track, said he. To first to find him make a smoke that all the rest can see. We took the track and followed back where Crowbar followed fate. We found a dead man in the scrub, but 'twas not Crowbar's mate. The station hands from Starving Steers were searching all the week, but never news of Marshall's fate came back to Dingo Creek. And no one, save the spirit of the sand waste, fierce and lone, knew where Jack Marshall crawled to die, but Crowbar might have known. He'd scarcely closed his quiet eyes, or drawn a sleeping breath. They say that Crowbar slept no more, until he slept in death. A careless roving scamp that loved to laugh and drink and joke, but no man saw him smile again, and no one saw him smoke. And when we spelled at night he'd lie, with eyes still open wide, and watch the stars as if they'd point the place where Marshall died. The search was made as searches are, and often made in vain, and on the 7th day we saw a smoke across the plain. We left the track and followed back. 'Twas Crowbar still that led, and when his horse gave out at last, he walked and ran ahead. We reached the place and turned again, dragged back and no man spoke. It was a bushfire in the scrubs that made the cursed smoke. And when we gave it best at last, he said, "I'll see it through," although he knew we'd done as much as mortal men could do. I won't give up," he said, his hand pressed to his brow. "My God, the cursed flies and ants, they might be at him now. I'll see it so in 20 years, 'twill haunt me all my life. I could not face his sister, and I could not face his wife. It's no use talking to me now. I'm going back," he said. "I'm going back to find him, and I will, alive or dead." He packed his horse with water and provisions for a week, and then at sunset crossed the plain away from Dingo Creek. We watched him tramp beside the horse till we, as it grew late, could not tell which was Bonaparte and which was Marshall's mate. The dam went dry at Dingo Creek, and we were driven back, and none dared face the 90-mile when Crowbar took the track. They saw him at Dead Camel and along the dry hole creeks. There came a day when none had heard of Marshall's mate for weeks. They'd seen him at no Sunday, he called at starving steers. There came a time when none had heard of Marshall's mate for years. They found old Bonaparte at last, picked clean by hungry crows. But no one knew how Crowbar died. The soul of Marshall knows. And now, way out on Dingo Creek, when winter days are late, the bushmen talk of Crowbar's ghost, what's looking for his mate. For let the fools indulge their mirth, and let the wise men doubt, the soul of Crowbar and his mate have travelled further out. Beyond the furthest 2-rail fence, Collan and Nevertire. Beyond the furthest rabbit-proof, barbed wire and common wire. Beyond the furthest government tank, and past the furthest bore. The never never, no man's land, no more and nevermore. Beyond the land of break o' day, and sunset and the dawn, the soul of Marshall and the soul of Marshall's mate have gone. Unto that loving, laughing land where life is fresh and clean, where the rivers flow all summer, and the grass is always green. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Poets of the Tomb by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Larry Wilson. The world has had enough of bards who wish that they were dead. 'Tis time the people passed a law to knock 'em on the head. For 'twould be lovely if their friends could grant the rest they crave, those bards of tears and vanished hopes, those poets of the grave. They say that life's an awful thing, and full of care and gloom. They talk of peace and restfulness connected with the tomb. They say man is made of dirt, and die of course he must, but all the same a man is made of pretty solid dust. There is a thing that they forget, so let it here be writ, that some are made of common mud, and some are made of grit. Some try to help the world along, while others fret and fume and wish that they were slumbering in the silence of the tomb. 'Twixt mother's arms and coffin gear a man has work to do, and if he does his very best he mostly worries through, and while there is a wrong to right, and while the world goes round, an honest man alive is worth 1,000,000 underground. And yet, as long as she oaks sigh and wattle blossoms bloom, the world shall hear the drivel of the poets of the tomb. And though the graveyard poets long to vanish from the scene, I notice that they mostly wish their resting place kept green. Now were I rotting underground, I do not think I'd care if wombats rooted on the mound, or if the cows camped there. And should I have some feelings left when I have gone before, I think a ton of solid stone would hurt my feelings more. Such wormy songs of mouldy joys can give me no delight. I'll take my chances with the world, I'd rather live and fight. Though fortune laughs along my track, or wears her blackest frown, I'll try to do the world some good before I tumble down. Let's fight for things that ought to be, and try to make 'em boom, We cannot help mankind when we are ashes in the tomb. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
Australian Bards and Bush Reviewers by Henry Lawson. Read for LibriVox.org by Drew Conway. 5th of November 2016, Kent. While you use your best endeavour to immortalise in verse the gambling and the drink which are your country's greatest curse, while you glorify the bully and take the spieler's part, you're a clever southern writer scarce inferior to Bret Harte. If you sing of waving grasses when the plains are dry as bricks, and discover shining rivers when there's only mud and sticks, if you picture mighty forests where the mulga spoils the view, you're superior to Kendall and ahead of Gordon too. If you swear there's not a country like the land that gave you birth, and its sons are just the noblest and most glorious chaps on earth, if in every girl of Venus your poetic eye discerns, you are gracefully referred to as the young Australian Burns. But if you should find that Bushmen, spite of all the poets say, are just common brother sinners, and you're quite as good as they, you're a drunkard and a liar, and a cynic and a sneak, your grammar's simply awful, and your intellect is weak. End of poem. This recording is in the public domain.
The Ghost by Henry Lawson. Down the street, as I was drifting with the city's human tide, came a ghost, and for a moment walked in silence by my side. Now my heart was hard and bitter, and a bitter spirit he. So I felt no great aversion to his ghostly company. Said the shade, "At finer feelings let your lip in scorn be curled. Self and pelf, my friend, has ever been the motto for the world." And he said, "If you'd be happy, you must clip your fancy's wings, stretch your conscience at the edges to the size of earthly things. Never fight another's battle, for a friend can never know when he'll gladly fly for succour to the bosom of the foe. As the power of truth and friendship, let your lip in scorn be curled. Self and pelf, my friend, remember is the motto of the world. Where society is mighty, always truckle to her rule. Never send an eye undotted to the teacher of a school. Only fight a wrong or falsehood when the crowd is at your back, and till charity repay you, shut the purse and let her pack. At the fools who would do other, let your lip in scorn be curled. Self and pelf, my friend, remember, that's the motto of the world. Ne'er assail the shaky ladders Fame has from her niches hung, lest unfriendly heels above you grind your fingers from the rung. Or the fools who idle under, envious of your fair renown, heedless of the pain you suffer, do their worst to shake you down. At the praise of men or censure, let your lip in scorn be curled. Self and pelf, my friend, remember, is the motto of the world. Flowing founts of inspiration leave their sources parched and dry. Scalding tears of indignation sear the hearts that beat too high. Chilly waters thrown upon it drown the fire that's in the bard, and the banter of the critic hurts his heart till it grows hard. At the fame your muse may offer, let your lip in scorn be curled. Self and pelf, my friend, remember, that's the motto of the world. Shun the fields of love, where lightly to a low and mocking tune strong and useful lives are ruined, and the broken hearts are strewn. Not a farthing is the value of the honest love you hold. Call it lust, and make it serve you. Set your heart on naught but gold. At the bliss of purer passions, let your lip in scorn be curled. Self and pelf, my friend, shall ever be the motto of the world." Then he ceased and looked intently in my face, and nearer drew. But a sudden, deep repugnance to his presence thrilled me through. Then I saw his face was cruel, by the look that o'er it stole. Then I felt his breath was poison, by the shuddering of my soul. Then I guessed his purpose evil, by his lip ensneering curled, and I knew he slandered mankind, by my knowledge of the world. But he vanished as a purer, brighter presence gained my sight. "Heed him not! There's truth in friendship in this wondrous world," she cried. "And of those who cleave to virtue in their climbing for renown, only they who faint or falter from the height are shaken down. At a cynic's baneful teaching, let your lip in scorn be curled. Brotherhood and love and honor is the motto for the world." End of poem. This recording is in the public domain. End of In the Days When the World Was Wide and Other Verses by Henry Lawson.